I call this meeting at Tacoma Park City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
I'm here.
Councilmember Wright. Councilmember Clay.
Here.
Councilmember Robinson.
Here.
Councilmember Stevens.
Present.
Councilmember Sniffer.
Here.
Councilmember Schultz.
Okay. I know that Councilmember Schultz won't be here this evening. He's out of the country, but will be back next week. And I know that, as far as I know, Councilmember Wright will be here. First item is council comments, and I'd like to start with just a few things. First, it's nice to see so many people here this evening. I'm assuming most of you are here for the Ward 3 evening. And sorry that we're squeezing into this smaller room, but as I think most of you know, the council chambers / auditorium has been under renovation since September, and we should be back in there sometime in the next, all right, the spring. Hopefully by April 1st. And if any of you didn't get a chance to see the boards out in the lobby when you were out there, when you leave, they're over in the far corner, and that shows you a little bit of what that room will look like. So we've been meeting in here, and hence we have smaller space and fewer chairs, but it looks like most people got chairs, and that's good. I have a couple items just to mention. The first one, I wanted to check with my colleagues. I think you've all seen the draft for our consideration for a letter in support of Historic Tacoma and others to oppose the request by the current owner of the Tacoma Theater in the District of Columbia to demolish it and replace it with 43 apartments. And I just wanted to check with my colleagues, since that letter needs to be hand-delivered this week, if you've all seen have a chance to see the letter, and make sure that if you're in agreement that we should send the letter, and if there's any questions about that.
I support it. I've seen it. It's fully supported. I think it's crazy that they would even consider doing it.
Everybody agree with that? Okay, we will get that letter out tomorrow. The next thing I wanted to mention is that just like tonight is the Ward 3 night, which is the first one of these that we're doing. The second one we have scheduled is the Ward 6 night, which is Tuesday, February 16th. And I wanted to make sure to mention that, since Councilmember Schultz is not here to remind folks. Then I also wanted to mention the Tacoma Park Art Swoop, which is Sunday, January 31st. And let me just read this quick little notice so that folks know about it. It says, artists, musicians, writers, poets, performers, and other members of the creative community are invited to join the Arts and Humanities Commission at Art Swoop, a mixer and participatory planning event for creative professionals in the Tacoma Park area. Participants are asked to come prepared to discuss their role in their respective creative community and to contribute in an informal setting their ideas for special initiatives and programming to improve the cultural landscape of the area. The event is designed to unify creative professionals in the Tacoma Park area, to address findings within its cultural plan, and to inspire artists to get active within the community. With a casual atmosphere and a format based on open space technology, members of the Commission hope to encourage artists to come out with their creative minds sharpened and their ideas in hand, and I have no idea what open space technology is. But Art Swoop is Sunday, January 31st from 4 to 7 p.m. at Jackie's Restaurant at 8081 Georgia Avenue. You can RSVP to Adam at alienequivalent.net. I'm sure this will be posted on the city's website if you want to get more information. And there are going to be refreshments with beverages donated by the restaurant's owner. So that notice has been put out by the Tacoma Park Arts and Humanities Commission. And since it's coming up soon, I wanted to let people know about it. Just two other items I wanted to mention. The first one. Oh, whoa.
That was pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
Byrne, you have hearing left.
Yeah.
Not yet.
Byrne does, but 84 of us do not. Yeah, right. This was obviously not working, right? No wonder.
You want help to carry that?
Very sorry. What?
Would you like help to carry that?
No, there's no sense of hearing it. It's, just sit, I guess. Can't, no?
Just leave it low.
Yeah. Well, no, off.
Off.
It's
Good.
off. So if those of you have trouble hearing on this side of the room, raise your hand.
Even with the speed, yeah. Could hear fine before.
They're all saying, what? Apologize for that. As I noted last week, the opening session of the Maryland General Assembly was last Wednesday, and I was joined by 3 of my council colleagues, council members Robinson, Wright, and Snipper, and we went down there and met with a number of legislators. The Maryland Municipal League had a reception, and the craziness in Annapolis has kicked off. We will continue to go down there and try and make sure that municipalities lose as little money as possible from the state budget and see what other things go on there. I'm assuming that the main action will be cuts, and then since there will be no bills with any fiscal notes for increases in any money, then that leaves the legislators to ponder any number of other things that they might mess around with that don't necessarily cost anything except maybe our sanity sometimes. And then the final item I just wanted to mention is I attended and represented the city at the county's Martin Luther King celebration yesterday at the Strathmore Music Center. And that's something that the city, I understand, is officially a partner in. And it's something that I hadn't been aware of that connection and that particular significance of the city's involvement with it. So this was my first time attending, and I had some questions about how we're doing that and how we might want to improve what we're doing there. It was a very nice ceremony. It was a 2-hour program, and it was basically a partnership with the county, the city of Gaithersburg, the city of Tacoma Park. Gaithersburg had a number of items in the program in terms of presenting awards to school children who had written essays on the theme for this year, which was honoring heritage, inspiring change. And they had their community chorus sing a number in the program, and it was very nice to see that participation. I felt a little bit lonely there in that I was representing Tacoma Park, but we didn't have anybody in the program. So I wanted to make sure that we consider, as we think about next year and what the city might do for the Martin Luther King holiday, how we might adjust our participation in that program. So I'll be talking with staff about that, and if anybody has any ideas, I'd appreciate hearing it. And so, are there other council comments? Councilmember Clay.
Actually, I've also spent a lot of time thinking about what the city could do around service and in particular Martin Luther King, and would like to see us engage the service community more. We talked about it in a lot of different ways in the last couple of years. We've talked about it in the budget when we've talked about looking at how we could leverage volunteers in support of a number of things that we'd like to do here in the city but haven't been able to afford to do. We've talked about it in terms of creating community. So there are a lot of interesting ways that we can engage in community service activities year-round, but also with the Martin Luther King holiday. As many of you know, I work in the field of emergency management for the federal agency that does national service in this country. And as such, I've been fairly engaged in the Haiti activities this week and looking at how people can support the response domestically, and have pretty seriously neglected my city email. So to those of you that I have neglected this week, I apologize, and I hope that I'll be able to get to you by the end of the week. If you have any pressing concerns, I would ask that people call me on the phone in the evening. Also, I have a constituent here tonight who's going to be speaking at the public comment time period regarding the sidewalk issue, and in particular sidewalks in Prince George's County, and just wanted to let folks know that this is a group that has been organizing for quite a long time and has had all of their ducks in a row, if you will. Gotten all the people in the local community on board for the sidewalks, and so she'll be speaking to that. But I think that there are probably a couple of places around the city, regardless of this, what we end up doing with the matrix, who have been in line for sidewalks for a while, not only in my ward, but in a couple other places, and who have done, I think, a lot of the groundwork. So I would like to see us look and see if we can start with them as demonstration projects, if nothing else. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I had the pleasure of speaking at the Martin Luther King celebration here in Tacoma Park. It was organized by several city residents, a couple of whom are staff members of the city, but they did it on their own time. Up until last year, the city always had a celebration in honor of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. On his birthday. Last year we stopped doing it, and I guess at that time started to partner with the county. I particularly like the grassroots organizing of a celebration rather than the government doing it, and I also like it being local rather than at the county level. And that's not to say I don't support. I think it's good to also support at the county level too. But I know the people who did the organizing this year would love to have additional help in organizing the event for next year. I believe they're going to start early this year in doing that and are seeking volunteers. And if you want to contact me, I can put you in touch with them. And you can get you can call me at 301-565-0190. The other thing I wanted to mention is last week at the council meeting, we had a management person from a local group home come in and talk to us about some management issues at the group home that came to our attention because of a series of runaways from that home that the police had reported. Group homes provide a very beneficial service to the community, and when they're working well, the young people have a safe haven where they can live and learn values that maybe they haven't been learning in their homes. But since last week's meeting, where we were assured by the management that was an anomaly, the problems they were having, several other problems with that home have come to my attention. And Barb, I was wondering if the city, and I don't know whether it would be the police department, who might check more frequently on that home to see how things are going, because I've heard allegations of supervisory staff not being there, and the numbers that are reported in the newspaper, and other allegations of poor management. And I know it's not our job to manage those group homes, but I think it is a safety issue for the young people that live there, that we at least make sure that the company that runs that is running it legally and properly. Thank you.
And if I can just do a quick follow-up on the Martin Luther King celebrations, I had always been aware that the city did one here. I hadn't been aware that the city was formally affiliated with the county event. I understand that we're part of the charter of that event, and so what I'm hoping to do is to understand what our perceived obligations are there and how we might want to proceed with that one while keeping in mind the local one that's been happening as well.
Thank you.
Other comments? Councilmember Robinson?
Thank you all for coming. All of you who are in Ward 3, I appreciate your interest. I'm going to say a couple things about how tonight might go, and there's not enough time. We have 35 minutes allocated. Of course, we can go over, but if each of you spoke for 3 minutes, which is our limit, we wouldn't hit that. So if you speak, keep it concise and say what you want to say. It's, it'll help us all. I'm going to say a couple things about your role here tonight, why you're here, I hope. One is so that we can get to know each other a little better. I spoke to some of you, and I hope that you speak to each other. Those of you who are in Ward 3, it's a political distinction. I mean, it's just a line on a map. You know, it happens to be, you happen to be the people that I represent, but it's still an opportunity because you can go through me to have things addressed. So get to know each other and watch our process. You've already seen that we on the council speak about all kinds of things. Some of them are specific to the ward, some of them aren't. And we also have a staff. There are somewhere between 130 and 140 staff members in the city who do what we do with our $20-some million budget. And those staff people are here serving you as well. I'm in the middle between you and staff. I'm not paid as much as staff. Tisk, tisk. But I'm paid more than you are, by a little bit. And my role is to try to be at the interface between what you find important, what you want to see done, and what the staff can do. So that's one of my roles. Another one of my roles is to try to figure out what policies we want to implement on a citywide basis to craft the laws and rules under which we labor, or what concerns what we do. What do we do? We manage we manage our commonly owned assets, right? We own some things in common. The streets, we own the streets in common. We own the laws that we labor under. Those are our laws. We all own, in a sense, those laws. And the enforcement of those laws is another thing that we own in common. So those are the things that we do together. The staff provides programs. It spends our money in certain ways. And so those are your programs. They're things that we all pay for and manage. Some of the things that we cover here on these nights are really small, and some are much bigger. So as you watch, I hope you'll come back or watch on TV or whatever, that you'll see that we do lots of things. Some things we control, some things we don't control. How do you change things? If you want to change something, how are you going to do it? Well, if it's a small thing, you can come to me and I'll try to convince staff to do that thing, whatever it is. Or I'll get guidance on whether it's in their plan or where it is on their priority list. And if it's not in the priority list the way you want it to be on the priority list, well, then you have to build a case. I can build it with you, or you can talk to your neighbors and friends and say, we think this is important, and you can bring that information to me through a petition or what have you. And while you're building a case, you can build an argument, right? You say, we want this because. So I'm just kind of blabbing away here because these are things that are on my mind as your representative. I hope they're helpful to you. I have two other small points, and one is that there's a question I think that's important for all of us to consider, and that is whether a city is better at providing services and maintaining our group of laws than the county or the state or what have you. Why are we a city? And I happen to believe that we are better at providing services, so that's one of the reasons I'm here. And the other question I have that some of you might resonate with some of you, and that is, why are our taxes so high? And the answer to that is, in part, because we subsidize the county. So every extra dollar that you spend in taxes, in part, subsidizes the county because they don't give us back money that they take for services they don't provide. So that's one of my little hobby horses. It's something I'd like to see addressed and changed. It's not an easy thing to change. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Josh, who I know has other comments.
Just two comments. One, I wanted to apologize for missing the Ward 3 reception earlier. I got stuck at work in a meeting I couldn't avoid. Not fun. I would have rather been here with all of you. The second thing, I wanted to check in with the city manager to see if we've heard back from the governor's office. When Josh Russin was here, we did bring up the issue of Ethan Allen between the Junction and New Hampshire, and he took down the information and said he would get back to us, and I mentioned it to him again when I was in Annapolis and saw him at the reception, and that's the issue that he was going to look into and push for us because the road needs to be repaved, and we're in a battle with the SHA about who owns the road. Have we heard anything back from him?
I got several emails from him. I don't believe any of them were on that topic, but I will follow with them tomorrow.
Okay, great, thanks. If we don't get a good response, I'd like to be helpful in pushing on that.
One follow-up to that point. I don't see Philadelphia on here except one, on the sidewalk study. I'm kind of jumping ahead, but I had a specific comment about sidewalk on Ethan Allen tonight. Could we have a sense of whether or not that sidewalk along Ethan Allen is something that we would have responsibility for, or whether the state would have responsibility for it? And you don't need to answer right now, but that's the question I have. Thank
Okay. Next, I just want to give a quick scheduling update. I don't think we have any additional agenda items. In terms of upcoming meetings, next Monday, the 25th, we're going to have a presentation on results of the resident survey, which is the second resident survey. The first one was 2 years ago, so we might get some information about any possible changes in the 2 years. And there's also going to be a work session discussion of redevelopment of the city-owned lot in Tacoma Junction and other junction issues. The following week, Monday, February 1st, we're going to be having a work session discussion reviewing short-term goals in the strategic plan in conjunction with the city manager's quarterly report. The following week, Monday, February 8th, we have a work session discussion of off-leash dog areas. So for anybody in Ward 3 who's interested in dog park or off-leash issues, we're certainly happy to hear that that's a concern of yours tonight, but I did want to let you know that Monday, February 8th, we will be having a dedicated discussion on that topic. And the next item is adoption of minutes. We have minutes from October 26th and November 4th. Would somebody like to move adoption of the minutes? Moved by Councilmember Wright, seconded by Councilmember Siemens. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The next item is public comment period. So this is where we take public comment on any items that are not on the agenda, and also any items that are on a work session agenda. So basically, this is when anybody who would like to speak, not for the special session item, which is the resolution recognizing contributions of Jim O'Brien, or the Ward 3 comments, because that's going to be slightly later, just in a couple of minutes. So anybody who has any comments on anything but those two items, and if you please identify yourself and keep your comments to 3 minutes, appreciate it.
Hello, my name is Pat Loveless, 7620 Maple Avenue, at Tacoma Park, Ward 4. I'd like to ask the city if there's any way, now we know last week Haiti had a nasty earthquake and has lost possibly more than 200,000 lives, and there's no water, no food, or anything to go around. And there's been a lot of these disasters coming up lately, like the tsunamis we've had, and the Indonesian earthquakes, and the people who have been lost to war and displaced. A lot of children and babies are being lost. I would like to ask the city, is it possible, and I know it is, if we can set up a peace fund to help counteract the effects of these, like if we could get people in the city to donate certain amounts to the peace fund, like if they have a relative or someone who's passed away, or somebody who's in the hospital with cancer or something, or somebody who loses a leg or whatever, they could donate a certain amount of money if they feel like it to Tacoma Park's peace fund. And that money could be used to help in natural and man-made disasters within our city and also around the world. And if we could set an example by doing this, I think we would, number one, we would make it much easier on the people when they are displaced and when they are, their way of life is destroyed. You know, we could make a difference, you know, and we could lead the country in that and also lead the world in that. I would love to be able to see this happen. And also, I would like to ask people, if it's possible, who I would give this to help the city start a fund like this. I got some money here, because I'd like to see this. I'd like to see this done. And if I can do it by setting an example, I think, you know, we can. The city itself can do it. And I would like to be able to see if we could do that as a city. And I got some money here. And I would like to be able to put that towards the city so we can start up a peace fund. Because that's one of the things, that, humanity can reach out to each other, and we can show that as a peace movement and as a justice movement, we can do it. We can do it. I know we can do it. I know there's a way, and I know we will be able to do it. And also, I know because I've been doing everything I can to try and help, with the children of the world, because that's one of my really things that really tears me up when I see children lost or molested or killed or lost in tragedies. And this could very easily happen to us because, there's an earthquake fault not too far from the Washington, D.C. area. And global warming is going to be making it worse, too. So I'd like to be able to see who I could give this to for the city so we could actually help start a fund like that. Would that be Barbara?
I think, Pat, that that's a noble offer. I think, though, that we have to get the cart before the horse and get the organization started before we start making contributions to it.
Yeah, but I would like to be able to give this toward the city so we can help make make something like this set up.
I think there's probably a difficulty with donating that specifically for that project because I think it's probably not a city government organization you're talking about. It would be a community organization. Yeah. So I would suggest you put it in an envelope for that and help to work with other city residents to form an organization like that.
Yeah, that would be great if we could do that because, we have a chance to really stand out in the community as a whole.
I will try to put you in touch with some people who would be interested in helping you to start an organization like that.
Because that would be great, because I've been wanting to do something like this for years. And if somebody in my condition can do it, that would show that anybody can do it. There's no excuse why we cannot work for peace, and no matter how we can do it. There's other areas we can do it. We can work against the war. We can work against the death penalty. We can work against hunger and starvation. We can work against our children being lost. And I would like to see, also, we as a city, we can work on a lot of things. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. We appreciate the suggestion. We'll see what we can do. Is there any other public comment?
Yes, I'm Catherine Haynes, 6802 Prince George's Avenue in Ward 2. And I'm here to comment mostly on the sidewalk study. I think last May or June, I led a petition with other neighbors. I know that it's not the normal thing to do a petition for sidewalks, but we just wanted to show that we're all in support. And there are many people who would like sidewalks in our area, but everybody agrees that there is one sidewalk that needs to happen first and has a number one priority, which is why I'm here tonight, because I notice it doesn't have a number one priority on the study. And I think probably why is you have to live in the neighborhood to understand what is a number one priority. There's a sidewalk that goes down, there's a Forest Park bus stop, and then there's a sidewalk that goes down Prince George's Avenue to Circle, and then the sidewalk stops. And then it continues again a block later, but there's a gap. So you have all these kids that come off the bus, and they're on the sidewalk, and they feel safe because they're on the sidewalk. So they have this mentality of, we're on a sidewalk, we're fine. And then the sidewalk ends, and then they're dumped out into the street, and they're continuing to act like they're on a sidewalk. And you can walk alone, first grade and up. So you have young kids that are, walking home alone in the middle of the street. And I have often, and I never raise my voice, but I have often screamed at my kid or someone else's kid because I was sure they were within, a foot of getting run over by a car. Because of New Hampshire Avenue, when there's traffic backed up on New Hampshire Avenue, they use Prince George's Avenue to cut through the neighborhood, and they blow off the stop sign, and they go really, really fast. And they don't pay attention to the kids. So we're hoping this will happen soon. And then the other thing I just wanted, I guess two other things I mentioned, that we'll be talking about a traffic study or something soon, just so that that's out there, that we've had petitions for a traffic calming in the area. And then the other thing is we've heard recently about a dog park that could be coming, and there is a lot of support for that because there are a lot of dogs in the neighborhood, and it's the section between New Hampshire Avenue and where Belford Drive and Belford Place and Prince George all meet. It's a totally unused space. It's right near the New Hampshire Avenue, so probably not the best place for kids, but probably a great place for a fenced dog park, and could be more eyes on the street, which is something that we've been trying to organize in our neighborhood because of a lot of sort of petty crime stuff. So we hope that would help with that. So thank you very much, and thanks for all of your work.
It's very helpful to get the explanation of the particular needs.
Hello, my name is Terry Beam, and I live at 112 Sherman. I've been a resident of Tacoma since I was a little girl, like 1968. One of the oldest Tacoma Park people, I guess now. But I live on the second block on Sherman, between Maple and Hancock. They have not put up any traffic lights. It's a very dangerous area. I mean, there's no street lights there. It's totally dark from right above Hancock to my house at 112 Sherman. There's a dark area there. There's a lot of overgrowth of shrubbery. My house has been burglarized. Many of the houses have been broken into, or there's been car theft. And, you know, I would like to see at least they're so concerned about all of the traffic bumps, which they also put one right in front of my house. But I know that's at an upcoming meeting. You all will be discussing that. But Sherman Avenue has been torn up between Carroll, Sherman, and Hancock now since '04. And, you know, versus speed bumps, it would be nice, you know, if they figure out a plan for Sherman, like perhaps one way, because we get an awful lot of the runoff traffic from East-West Highway. It's a very narrow street also. Okay, thank you.
Hi, David Borden, Ward 3. I was a member of the Public Safety Citizens Advisory Committee once upon a time. I'm here today as a resident of Tacoma Park, also in support of the organization Tacomans for Intelligent Marijuana Enforcement. You've heard from our spokesperson before. I'm here tonight to talk about data. As council members may recall, prior to my joining the Safety Committee in March 2008, the committee had begun requesting Tacoma Park arrest data of the form that the city provides to the government's Uniform Crime Report program. Our requests were unsuccessful. Last November, the Tacoma Voice happened to look into these issues and reported that during this time frame, drug enforcement in Tacoma Park had escalated dramatically. Specifically, in 2007, there were 37 drug arrests. In 2008, that had more than quadrupled, up to 160. However, the Voice article did not have more detailed information on the breakdown of those arrests within Tacoma Park. Following some leads that information in the article suggested to me, I was finally able to obtain this data from the Maryland State Police. And so I am reporting today that drug enforcement in Tacoma Park is primarily possession, primarily marijuana, and is primarily directed at African Americans. Specifically, to be precise, out of the 160 arrests we had the year before last, 120 of those were possession. Of the possession arrests, 85 of those were marijuana, which is about 1 out of every 6 arrests our police force made that year. And out of those 85, 64 of those people were African Americans. I see I have a yellow light. Time goes fast. The existence of racial disparity in our criminal justice system is rarely the result of deliberate racism, and I'm by no means intimating such here, but I'm putting these numbers forward as a matter of concern, as they are seen as a matter of concern at the national level, for example, by Maryland Senator Ben Cardin, who currently has sponsored the Justice Integrity Act to probe the causes of racial disparities in the criminal justice system and seek to ameliorate them. I have put together an information packet on these issues, which I will leave several copies with Ms. Carpenter for the council members, and would be happy to speak with any interested parties individually.
Thanks very much. And I did want to let folks know that the city manager provided us with the numbers that we requested in, I guess, yesterday. So we do have some numbers that the police department put together. And so we'll be happy to take a look at what you have and also ponder what the city manager's provided and see where we need to go from there. Thanks. Is there other comment particular to this section of the comment period before we get to other areas? Welcome.
That's right. Sachivan Iklay Khalsa, 6719 Conway Avenue, Ward 2. I'm here for two reasons. I wanted to support the Missing Link sidewalk as a top priority for any of the sidewalk improvements we do this year. That's the south side of 6800 block of Prince George's Avenue that Catherine Haynes referred to. It is indeed a high traffic and high pedestrian area that's missing that one piece that would link both sides of Prince George's sidewalk. The second item I wanted to address was also the Prince George's Triangle Park. It's right at the end of that area. It's a very underutilized park, and whatever the city can do to reappropriate both private and public spaces or support that for such things as dog parks and community gardens, which help build community, increase food security, and keep extra eyes on the street, reducing crime, would be very much appreciated. Thanks.
You can have your own.
Vern Kelly, Ward 3, Circle Avenue. I'm here tonight for several reasons. Thank you, Dan, and the council for setting up Ward 3 night and all the ward nights. I'm recently appointed to the advisory board of the Biodiesel Green Guild, and I have addressed some of you privately and have been made a member of this advisory board, and they are seeking to locate in Tacoma Park with a facility. Priority is to have a place to dispense the product that they're now brewing, and also to eventually set up one location, if possible, to both brew and retail sale of biodiesel, green diesel, which the city proudly uses 20% of, I think Daryl told me. So we want to be a provider of that. It's a co-op. It's set up as a co-op, and I'm on the advisory board. Secondly, there's a big cutback in ride-on buses at the county level. I think the bus system is horrendous. I think cutting back, when the gas prices drop and demand goes down, we can justify cutting buses. I think what we need to do is cut down the size of buses. I think we need to have jitneys that are less costly to operate and it can be packed with people, like they do in the third world, and utilize those efficiently. And the city should at least own some of those for parking management reasons, for our handicapped and other people. We should, in this one case, Dan, where I see, we should not give them money, and we should have our own, ride-on, because we don't need those huge buses, even if they're green. Another thing is grass is costing us all. Kiss your grass goodbye. It's time we all got rid of it. Composting leaves on site is what nature intended. By removing the leaves, we spend lots of petrol dollars and money to centralize the locations. We should have locations in every ward for composting and on-site grinders if we have to take them that far. But in truth, we should leave them lie to regenerate the soil. Basically, we're creating desert, and people have to kind of realize that. And grass is part of the desert. Okay, so people need to get wise. Circle Avenue paths and the safe street sidewalks. Circle Avenue needs to be lit. The street, there's Paper Street in a number of blocks. Between Goody and Woodland in particular, it needs lighting and could have street trees. It'd be very nice to improve that. And I know Daryl's working on the lights on the other end. Solar lights haven't worked out as we'd hoped, but we need lighting. It's my teenage daughter uses it every day, and it's not safe. and also at New Hampshire up Erskine all the way to 15th, definitely need sidewalks. It's just deplorable, the people in the street on that busy stretch. So I thank you all for the work you're doing, and anything we can do to get that money, that's for the sidewalks and the streets and the safety of our kids and our people, I'd be happy to help with that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Any other comments?
Good evening. My name is Marie Jean, Ward 3, Lincoln Avenue. I'm here to ask for your help with the Haiti situation. I am, along with some other residents, I'm trying to plan a moment of hope from Tacoma to Haiti. It's hopefully a 5-hour program on a Saturday that would raise as much money as possible for Haiti to be given to hopefully the Clinton Fund. And the target date is February 6th, but that's subject to change. So it's quick and fast planning and to make it as big as possible, and hopefully the residents will come and bring their friends as well. If anyone wants to help plan this, my email address is mnjean@gmail.com. That's JEAN. Thank you.
Marie, I thank you for working on this, and again, I'd just like to repeat your email address. It's M as in Mary, N as in Nancy, JEAN@gmail.com.
Tom Wolf, Ward 3, Sycamore Avenue. I'd like to put my support in for the street lights. Sycamore Avenue has street lights, but they're not very good, and it'd be great in a town like this if we could upgrade the street lights to maybe LEDs or something that don't take up so much power, because I know on Sycamore they're the old screw-in bulbs that are just sucking power. The other thing is, as I'm getting a little older and our taxes keep going up, fiscal restraint would be a little good. This city, as my wife tells me, is the most expensive place to live in Maryland as far as taxes go. And I was reading in the Tacoma Voice about the, I think it's the Public Works building that we decided to borrow money to fix up. Now, Public Works, I don't want to say anything against them because I think they're the best part of the city. They do a great job. But I noticed that Councilman Wright and Siemens voted against it, and I wish, Dan Robinson would have voted against it. I don't like us if we don't have the money to do things, I don't think we need to do them. We're not Republicans. We're not George Bush. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. The next item is a resolution recognizing contributions of H. James O'Brien. And I'd like to note that his wife and daughter are here, and I would appreciate it if somebody would introduce the resolution, and then I would like to read it.
I'd like to introduce it.
Well, it's in Ward 2.
Councilmember Clay was moving the resolution, and Councilmember Robinson seconding the resolution. I'll take comments from the council in a minute, but I just wanted to read the resolution. This is a resolution recognizing the contributions of H. James O'Brien. Whereas Tacoma Park is known for its thoughtful, engaged, environmentally forward-thinking, and often opinionated residents who appreciate the history of the community while working to make it a better place for the future. And whereas H. James O'Brien, more commonly known as Jim, is a Tacoma Parkian to the bone, having lived in the community and called it home for over 25 years. And whereas Jim, an architect and principal of the architectural and construction design build firm of Edge Construction, has shared his time and talents with the community, providing technical and design support for a variety of community projects, never hesitating to share his opinion, quick wit, and expertise with others. And whereas Jim has been one of the strongest supporters of the city's efforts to redevelop the new Ave and a tireless proponent of intelligent and sustainable development along the New Hampshire Avenue corridor, the Washington Adventist Hospital site, and the community in general. And whereas Jim has demonstrated his tireless devotion to the cause of beautification and maintenance of the historic integrity of Tacoma Park through his sage advice and intrepid leadership of the Facade Advisory Board. And whereas that august body expresses its profound gratitude to him for his contributions and would like him to know that his attendance record is a model to which all aspire. And whereas the city appreciates the contributions that Jim has made to the community as a resident, business owner, and member of both the Facade Advisory Board and the Washington Adventist Hospital Land Use Committee. Now therefore be it resolved that the City Council of Tacoma Park, Maryland hereby recognizes the contributions of Mr. H. James O'Brien in preserving the historic character of Tacoma Park and in furthering the city's efforts to create a more sustainable, livable community for the future. And I'd just like to say that we're doing this now because we want to let Jim know how much we appreciate all the work that he's done. His health is not good, and we really want to let him know that the contributions to this community have just been tremendous. I've known Jim for quite a number of years and have worked with him on a number of projects the city has undertaken, and his help has been invaluable in coming in and helping to interpret some plans, see what was going on with a particular project, understand better some of the ramifications, and his suggestions as far as how things might be improved in city projects, in other people's projects with the Facade Advisory Board, giving advice to business owners who might have opportunities to improve the fronts of their buildings and take advantage of opportunities to get funding to do that has really been extremely helpful. And just want to let everybody in the community know what a wonderful job he has done for all of us. Other people like to make comments? Councilmember Clay.
When this came up, I was actually out of town, but I received several emails from folks when they saw it on the agenda that wanted to express from the community how meaningful it's been to them to have somebody who's such an advocate for the community and making this a better place to live, and what a terrific contribution that's been. And this is someone who's very well loved and very well appreciated in the community, and I certainly appreciate all of the support and the all the countless little things that happen that support things that I'm interested in. I think that are very good for the community. And I just wanted to share that small piece.
I had the opportunity to work with Jim pretty closely for a couple of years. He was the manager of the building that I built on near New Hampshire Avenue, and his expertise, along with a great heart and wisdom kind of mixed with humor, it was a great and wondrous experience, and I very much appreciate that time that I got to know him.
And we'd be happy for any member of the public who wants to comment on this resolution.
Joseph Klockner, and I've worked with Jim for over 15 years in the construction business and on several projects here in Tacoma Park, and I want to reiterate what Dan said, that anybody who's worked with Jim knows what a great person he is and how much he's contributed to the Tacoma Park community and to the city as a whole, and I'd like to thank the City Council for putting forth this resolution and to acknowledge Jim and his wife Peg so that she can take this sentiment back to him. Thanks.
Thank you.
My name is Peg O'Brien, excuse me, and on behalf of Jim and his entire family, I would like to thank the mayor and the city council for recognizing Jim through this resolution. It's very touching and very much appreciated. Jim has always taken pride in being a citizen of Tacoma Park. He relates extremely well with the city's interests and values, and they're definitely aligned with his. Jim is a man of peace, giving, fairness, and sensitivity. His interests and skills in architecture, aesthetics, city planning, and construction allowed him to support the city in a way that brought him great joy. One project in particular I know he really liked was the Tacoma Park Silver Spring Co-op. And I would also, just from a personal standpoint, would like to say that I'm truly blessed that Jim has shared his life with me. He's my true love, my soulmate, forever and a day. Thank you very much.
I think we can vote on this resolution. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it unanimously. And Peg, if you'd like to come up here, I'd like to give you the formal copy of the resolution. Take that to Jim and let him know that we're talking about it. And I'll be happy to come by at your convenience. Okay. We have now arrived at our first ward night. And I do have to say that I appreciate the thoughtfulness of the suggestion, and it was from Roger Schlegel during the campaign. And I took it to heart and thought it was a great idea, and I hope we do it justice. As I said, this is the first one, so we're trying this. We're open to tweaking it, changing it, making it as useful as possible for all of you, so that you can come here and have a more formal way of making sure that your concerns about what you care about in the city, what you care about in your neighborhood, gets addressed to the council, that we have a chance to hear those concerns, that we can maybe give you some information back. That information may not come tonight, but it may come in other ways, and we'll see what we can establish as the best way to do this, and hope this works for all of us. So I know that the staff provided some information. I don't know if we want to just kind of mention what that is, or Darrell, were you anticipating mentioning any of this, or did you just want to make sure that people know it's here and get the handout? And so there should be copies of a fairly long memo to Barbara Matthews from Darrell Braithwaite about recently completed and upcoming projects in Ward 3. So if any of you didn't get a copy of this. Okay, I didn't get a chance to look at it. It's a number of memorandum from various departments heads stapled together as one big memo. So a number of things from the police, housing and community development, and so there's maybe, Sarah, if you could get that and pass those through, so anybody who didn't get those, please pick up a copy. And so what we'd like to do is hear from you all. So if you have things that you want to tell us, we'd appreciate hearing them. We may have a little chance, depending on how long this takes and where it goes, to maybe have a little bit of dialogue. It might be mostly to hear from you, and we have a couple comments, and then we'll discuss some ways to do follow-up. Councilmember Robinson might have a couple ideas about how he wants to handle things as well. And maybe what I'll do is what we usually do, which is when you get up to speak, if you can identify yourself, and I'll set the timer. We set it for 3 minutes. I'll use that as a guideline. You'll see the yellow and red lights. You'll hear the beep at 3 minutes. And generally what that means is if you haven't wrapped up, if you could please try and wrap up what you're saying, and that way we can get to hear from all of you and not go really long tonight. So the floor is open for anybody who would like to talk about Ward 3 issues.
Do we have to get up to do this?
Yeah, up to the microphone so we get it on the record.
Yeah.
Sure.
You know what, I don't know if this would be helpful, but
Let me kind of walk through the neighborhoods, just to say what the neighborhoods, and if you'd say, you raise your hand or whatever and say, oh, yeah, I'm from that neighborhood, that might be a way, just so that you can see that neighborhoods are represented here. There's
And if I can also just mention that we also have the microphones at the table.
Yeah.
And if you feel more comfortable sitting at the table,
Safer behind the podium.
For those of you who need the safety of the podium, that's available. For those of you who feel more comfortable in a chair at the table, we can do that as well.
I'm just going to say, is anyone here from Pinecrest? Okay, welcome Pinecrest. Is anyone here from Circle Woods? Welcome Circle Woods. Is anyone here from B.F. Gilbert? Where would you say you're from?
Allegheny and Elm.
Okay, Allegheny and Elm. All right. Wacko. Anyone here from Wacko? There you go. You've been claimed.
I have no idea what the name of my name is.
You're B.F. Gilbert.
No. You're Sycamore?
Well, but that's a subgroup of B.F.
Okay.
You guys can't even.
We don't even know, yeah.
This is important. You gotta organize.
A Sycamore, I think, is its own world. It has its own. Hey, Sycamore? Thank you, Tom.
I'm sure Sycamore believes that they're their own.
Yeah.
There's an island called Sycamore.
B.F. Gilbert? Well, yeah. S.S. Carroll? Ta-da! Who have I left out? Uh-oh. Wacko, we covered. So there's a sample. Somebody here from every neighborhood, so thank you all.
Could you
So.
talk about the boundaries? I'm interested in what's in your.
You know, the neighborhood associations, we don't control the neighborhood. About the ward boundaries or neighborhood associations?
What's in Ward 3?
What's in Ward 3? Well, it's a dog bone shaped ward with a narrow part at the junction. And one of the ends of the dog bone goes Philadelphia, kind of Maple, but inside Maple, going to Sligo Creek, going down Sligo Creek to Jackson, coming behind the houses on Jackson up to the junction. So there's the top chunk of the dog bone, and the bottom chunk of the dog bone goes behind Carroll, headed over all the way to Eastern. Okay, all the way to Eastern, and then down Eastern all the way to New Hampshire, and then up New Hampshire all the way to Ray, and then kind of zigs along Ray, which becomes Poplar, and through some backyards. It includes Goody, and it includes Sycamore, but not. It goes between Sycamore and Woodland, and it comes. Not Woodland, and it comes back to the junction. So that's the lower chunk of the dog bone. We don't control the neighborhood associations. We are not our creatures, or we don't. We want you to thrive, but it's up to you guys to kind of figure out who's who. Anyway, that's enough. Let's hear what you have to say.
Hi, my name is Elise Ligori. I live at 6613 Westmoreland Avenue, and I've been worried about an issue at 6602 Cockerell for quite a long time now, and I've been communicating with our WACO president, Bruce Moyer, who apologizes that he couldn't be here tonight. And I think he's been communicating with the chief of police as well. My concern about this property is about the animals, and I want to make sure they're not being abused. And I believe there are some there's a car issue that, in many emails, I've been emailing Bruce, and he's been emailing other people in the city since August. And some people are more focused on a possible used car business. And I'm sure for the people that live right near that house, that's a very legitimate concern. But my concern is more that there are pit bulls, and I'm concerned if they're being bred to fight. And I have been asking, but haven't gotten any kind of definitive answer, whether the city has looked into this.
I can tell you, Dan. Well, please. Because we're on the cable system and people are watching, they're not going to hear otherwise.
I know Danny. I know the owner of the business. The dogs are very well cared for, and they're sold. He has a license for it. His car business is a problem. He knows of that. He's trying to obtain a lot. He's working out of D.C. He's having problems getting his license. He's an entrepreneur, and he's not really a problem. He's very approachable. There was a problem once when the dogs got out. I was a dog owner. I have kids, little kids that have lived there.
there was a fear factor one time, but there is no, the dogs bark, and they bark less now. I don't know if Buddha died or what, the big puppy, but point is you should feel rest assured that those dogs are being treated properly, and those dogs have not gotten out for years and years. They do bark, and if you come by with a dog, they especially bark because they're on one side of a fence and you're on the other, and that's what the dogs do. And the cars are a problem. I know the police chief knows about that problem. He's been cited several times. I've tried to be of some assistance as a land use planner to try and find him a place, but he is a very reformed young man who has had problems in high school, and I think we're all pleased to see that he's improved so much. So I would belay your fears. He's manageable.
I would just add, I'm happy to hear that. I truly am. I want to make sure, I just want to note that the animals are being treated well. One resident neighbor has told me that the dogs are chained within the fenced yard. And that, I was told, is against the law in Maryland, that if they're in an enclosed yard, they should be able to run free. So it's just, quality of life. So again, I very much appreciate hearing what you're saying.
But you can talk to Danny. He's approachable. He's not, speaks English, and he's a neighbor.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just as a point of information, I get calls about that site in Ward 2. And I've shared them with Dan and before Dan was here with Bruce, but I've received several calls of complaint.
And I know that city code enforcement and police have been actively involved in monitoring that situation.
Hello, my name is Saul Schneiderman. I live at 306 Lincoln Avenue. I have a concern about whether or not it's a good idea to put crosswalks somewhere on Carroll Avenue, since it's been redone recently. About 15 years ago, when I was a bit more active in the city, I drove my car all along Tacoma Park, and I did a little survey on crosswalks, which if any of you haven't published it, I'll make a copy of it for you, but it's out of print right now. And basically, it was just helter-skelter. All the crosswalks looked different. Some were in good condition, some were not. And I haven't revisited it. And there's a controversy, of course, about crosswalks, because sometimes pedestrians step into them and think that it's safe, and sometimes cars can't see crosswalks. So I don't want to weigh in on that controversy. But I just wonder whether anybody has looked into it as to whether or not there's any kind of policy. I realize that I think Carroll Avenue is a state road, is it not? Yes. And who is responsible for painting crosswalks? Is that a city function or?
State highway. If it's a state highway does the crosswalks. They decide the location that they can go and how they get painted.
It all belongs to the state.
Correct.
And so if any of these crosswalks disappeared in the rehab of Carroll Avenue,
they've disappeared. They're to come back, and I believe that there was a section of them that was to be done. Has that been done in Old Town?
I don't think they've had the install. They've just ground out the old ones.
Okay, and that there's the whole section down where you're talking about where they haven't been redone, they're still to be redone. So right now, it's worse than usual in that all the ones that were there have gone away and haven't come back, but they are coming back.
Okay, thank you.
But there is one, there have been requests to put one on Lincoln, at Lincoln, near Lincoln, where the road comes up and comes around the corner, and it's dangerous to cross there, and there doesn't seem to be, we haven't made a lot of progress on getting State Highway to agree to put a sidewalk or a crosswalk at that location.
And so one of the things that we're trying to do in the issue that Councilmember Wright brought up at the beginning about talking to State Highway about their contention now that we own Ethan Allen instead of them having owned Ethan Allen and having maintained it for decades and decades and decades, is that we have various issues with State Highway, and there are issues on Ethan Allen, there are issues all around the city, there are issues of particular concern in the junction, and that there's a number of things that we need to meet with them about, and so I think that that issue, those issues will be coming to a head soon, because we'll be trying to set up a meeting with them and putting all those issues on the table.
Is this an opportunity, Bruce, for the community associations to buy some paint?
Sounds like limbo could be good. We just put down the crosswalks we need and want, be done with it.
We just do it ourselves.
Why wait for the friggin' bureaucracy? I'm serious.
Anarchy, anarchy.
Not anarchy, not anarchy. They can resolve where we should have them. And then they can say if the community associations wish to donate the funds to put them in.
Do it ourselves.
I know contractors that can put them in. I've got machines.
I think, I realize it's in the Tacoma Park spirit, but I think it also opens some questions for liability.
Sam Abbott's rolling in his grave.
Would anybody else like to?
I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm saying I'm not going to tell you to do it.
I'm asking a serious question. I'm asking a real serious question. If we're in limbo, they think it's our street, then while we're in limbo phase, God bless the Citizens Association. Or the county bless the City Association.
And whether we agree with you or not, we wouldn't say it on camera.
Be a politician there.
Anybody else?
About anything?
Yeah. Sure.
Oh, I
Sure.
just say that I'm.
If you tell us who you are first.
I'm sorry, Mary Jane Mitsui, at 6809 Allegheny Avenue, course Ward 3. I'm just like to make a comment about the dog park, and I've been going for over a year, seeing no problems whatsoever, no children hurt, and if anybody here would like to talk to me who has questions, please do. I'm like the gentleman said about that guy with the pit bulls. I am approachable, and I don't have pit bulls even. I'm approachable if you have any questions, because I like to hear other people's views, because I think there've been too many rumors going around, and I'd like to stop that and talk more, really talk what has happened in the past, et cetera.
Talking about Spring Park.
Yes, I'm sorry, Spring Park, yeah. Not any others, I don't know anything about anybody other place. So, thank you.
I was just going to say that there was the formal petition to the city for a dog park at Spring Park. That petition went, as the process dictates at this point, to the city manager for her decision. I don't know, do you want to speak for yourself on that in terms of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, I can try.
Fine. As the mayor mentioned, there's an administrative regulation that's been in place for a number of years, so the petition was presented to me. Want to thank everybody in the community. We had, Jesse was kind enough to compile all the comments. I think I had almost 70 pages of comments after they were all put together.
Why weren't they made public knowledge, though? I would like to see some of those comments.
I assume they're public.
And
Yes,
see
sure.
what percentage were poor or not. I was one who walked all around that neighborhood getting the petitions.
Yeah, we'd be happy to email that to you. It's in
So,
one
I did a lot of
document.
work. I'm sorry.
Right.
I felt like I wasn't treated right.
Yeah, and I'm sorry you feel that way. We do have all the comments there. That's public information. Jesse does.
Okay.
Yes.
So you'll get that.
I felt like the game was, I was told this is what we do. We work. I went with Ms. Carpenter, and this is what I was supposed to do.
Right.
I even worded it, showed you the wording of it. You said, that's okay. And then all of a sudden, this other issue came back about taxes. Why weren't we told that at the beginning?
I'm not sure what you mean by taxes. They're as part of
I'm sorry.
liability.
Liability, I'm sorry. We should
Yeah.
have told this microphone.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but we should have been told that right from day one,
as part of-
rather than wasting our time
Yeah.
going around talking.
I can
I
appreciate-
feel like an asshole, excuse me.
When I'm sorry. Certainly that was not anyone's intent. No, what she is referring to, as part of my review process, I did speak to the city's insurance carrier, and basically their advice was, from a liability perspective, that they did not recommend the off-leash running of dogs. Their very strong recommendation to the city was only to allow that in a fenced area, which is the most common practice that I have seen. I'm sorry.
I should have been told that before I even went.
Yeah, I checked once. I think you had already submitted your petition. So I apologize for your frustration.
Does that mean we're headed for a fence?
That will ultimately be to this, up to the city council because of the appropriation of funds. I have had some discussions internally with the staff. looking at not only Spring Park, but also perhaps some other areas in the city, just so we can provide some information to the City Council for their consideration at the meeting in February.
And I just wanted to mention that I know that there was consideration of a petition from folks for Forest Park. I know that other people have talked about trying to formalize the dog owners who meet at Ed Wilhelm Field, which is a park and planning property, so that any petition or any request for something there would have to go to park and planning, since we don't control that. It was interesting to hear the suggestion this evening about another possible area down, I don't remember exactly, Prince George's and Belfort, or whatever it is there in that particular area. That's another area that nobody had brought up before. So that what I anticipate will happen on the 8th is that we'll have a broader discussion about where we are and where we go from here and what some of the possibilities are. We'll have suggestions from staff, and then we hope to be able to have a way to proceed and not frustrate people with a process that didn't get where we needed to go.
And Bruce, I'd just like to note that that petition for Ed Wilhelm Field was submitted with the knowledge that the city, while it doesn't own Ed Wilhelm Park, it does manage Ed Wilhelm Park, and that was the reason that it was submitted to the city itself.
Okay. That's helpful to know.
And we submitted, not me, but other groups in 2005 also submitted a properly worded, supposedly, petition, and it was lost.
And I heard that, and maybe the clerk would like to explain.
I also, Mary Jane, I also have a copy of it. That initial petition, that was my error, that didn't get processed. That's squarely in my lap, that fell by the wayside. So
it was submitted right as the clerk's offices and a whole bunch of other offices were moving at the kind of the end of the construction process that put everybody where they are up on the 3rd floor, and it got boxed up to move up there with them, and that box didn't get opened for a long time. So apologies for that one. That should have gone through.
Would you get brownie points for that?
Sure.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Bruce. Yes, sorry.
Regarding the dog parks, I think it might be a worthwhile exercise before we have the conversation to look at all of the public space that's in the borders of the city, including all lands that are owned by Montgomery County Park and Planning, owned by the county, and owned by the city that aren't currently developed or have significant portions of them that aren't developed. And the other thing is that around the Ed Wilhelm Field, I know that we manage the field, but there's not during school hours, though. We don't have the rights to program that during school hours, and I think that regardless of what the principal of Piney Branch has said, I think that the school district might have something to say about mixed use of that field, and we shouldn't forget that, and have a process where, like we had somebody frustrated today, the school district weighs in at the end of the process with a veto.
And it would be very helpful to know if there's a potential for properties that the city owns or the county owns that are, as you say, undeveloped, so that so that it opens up the possibilities for some places where we're not necessarily taking away parkland that's multi-use and dedicating it to a use if there's a way to use something that just isn't used. So that would be very helpful information. Other topics, other people? Okay. Oh, now I definitely need to set this timer.
No, I'll be fast. Kay Daniels Cohen, Ward 3, 19 Sherman Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland, since 1946.
SS Carroll.
I'm an old school person. I went to the old Tacoma Elementary, the old Tacoma Junior High, and the old Montgomery Blair. So all old schools.
But that doesn't make you old.
I just want to say thank you to Mayor Williams for going ahead and having Ward 3 night and all the rest of the wards. Thank you to Dan Robinson for being our Ward 3 representative council person. And thanks to Mr. Roger Schlegel for bringing it up during the mayoral contest. It was a great idea, and I think for each of the wards, it's going to be really, I mean, just the dog park issue. I'm a cat herder myself, but the dog park issue is a big issue for the ward, and it probably is a large issue for the entire community. I like my little Tacoma Park. I love it. I mean, you know, if people will talk to me, and there's not a whole lot that goes wrong here. I mean, I think it's fantastic. It may be the most expensive place to live in the state of Maryland. I still love it because it offers me the opportunity to come to a city council and say what kind of problems I have. It offers me the opportunity to go to my mayor and say, hey, this is happening in SS Carroll neighborhood. What can we do about it? And have him give me suggestions. It offers me the opportunity to go to my council member and do the same thing. And we have a communication. I do allow them to speak occasionally back to me. It's rare, but I let them speak. Yeah, no timers. And mostly it's off the record from me. But I really appreciate that. I appreciate the city. I appreciate all the city services that we have, especially Public Works and the police department. So those are wonderful things. If you haven't lived inside a city limit like this, you don't know what it's like to be out there. I appreciate the city manager and the city clerk. I thank you all. I thank you all for doing the work that you're doing. What I want to suggest is everyone who's here tonight and anyone who's out there listening who has concerns about the junction, next week we're going to talk specifically about the junction, the corner of Ethan Allen and Carroll Avenues, and traffic lights and things like that. So I invite you to come back because that's a viable part of our community that's slowly slipping out from under our doorstop. We need it. We need it desperately. We need to bring it back. We need to get it to bring the liveliness back to the junction. Because back in the old school days, there was a huge bunch of stores in there that everybody went to all the time. And I know that can happen again. We can have a walking community of people utilizing those services again. And because the light just went red and beeped at me, I'll be kind and remove myself. But thanks again. I really appreciate having the opportunity to be a citizen and to participate in city government and in government in any way that I choose to, as much or as little as I choose to. It doesn't happen everywhere in the whole world, nor even in the county or the state of Maryland. Thank you.
Please, would one of you clarify, when is that meeting, where and when?
It's here.
Right here next Monday.
Next Monday.
In
Same room.
7:30, 10.
Yeah, 7:30 is when we start, when we get to it. Yes.
But as you can tell, it doesn't always just happen at 7:30. We have things to do first.
There are cookies.
Yeah?
Not cookies every week.
Cookies next week?
Come to Warren Heights.
Jeff Trunzo, 119 Sherman Avenue, also a part of SS Carroll, and I'd like to echo with emphasis Kay's enthusiasm and joy at living in Tacoma Park. I'd also like to thank the council and the city staff for their responsiveness in putting this event together. I think it's wonderful, and I think it'll engage more citizens and bring people and give an opportunity for folks to talk about macro issues and perhaps drill down to some very specific issues that perhaps a person just living on a street or a block has greater insight to. With that, I'd like to talk about a few items in the 100 block of Sherman Avenue, which starts out flat and goes to a great incline and ends at Maple Avenue. A lot of folks won't be surprised to know that the area, the corner specifically of Sherman and Maple Avenue, has been a concern for a very long period of time. And the city staff is well aware of the issues. There are initiatives going on, and we support anything and everything that can happen in regard to the commercial building to make things better there. And that includes environmental issues such as growth of invasives and landscaping, trash, loitering, code enforcement, police enforcement. I don't think I would be going too far to say that residents of Sherman Avenue would be delighted to have a video surveillance system that happens, when you go to a bank or a CVS or any other public parking lot to address some of the issues that go on there. The other issues I'd like to talk about are a little bit more recent, and they affect our property and a few others a little bit more personally, and they are parking issues. If I can start with the big issue, there seems to be a need for some rationalization of parking policy along Maple Avenue. Specifically, there are many buildings with large amounts of unused asphalt, yet it's curious why we have so many vehicles parked along Maple Avenue. And over the last 6 months, Sherman Avenue is getting parked upon by folks that live on Maple Avenue to a greater extent. We live in a city, we understand that. The vehicles specifically that I'm talking about are commercial vehicles. Lime green taxi cabs, work vehicles, work equipment. I've talked to some of the folks. They seem to be reasonable folks. They feel like their vehicles are safer there. And for whatever reason, where they're living or where they're mostly living, they cannot park the vehicles where they're living, where there is plenty of parking. And I don't want to give the wrong impression or sound like an elitist, but I'm a little bit annoyed by waking up every morning and having a row of taxi cabs parked in front of my house when no one on Sherman Avenue drives a taxi cab, and I think there are other places for them to park. That's my rant. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
On that point, Mayor?
Yes.
I wonder if the city manager might check with the Southland Corporation. I know that they've had some issues with the city and our rent stabilization laws in the past, and it's been recently they changed their parking policy, and I thought maybe we could find out exactly what their parking policy is. We have a lot of blue-collar workers in the neighborhood, and taxi drivers are one of the groups, and it would be a severe hardship on them not to be able to have their vehicles in the neighborhood near their residence. But I think we need to gather more information about what the situation is before we make any decisions. Thank you.
And was that Southland or Southern?
Southern Management. I'm thinking of 7-Eleven right now.
I know. Councilmember Clark.
Isn't there a law against parking a commercial vehicle on the street?
There is.
And taxis are commercial vehicles?
They are.
Okay. Second question is, does the city have the authority to require that any multi-unit building that has parking allow commercial vehicles to park on its property? Sort of a reverse rule. No? Okay.
So was that a yes, there is a law against that?
Yes, there is.
Colleen?
Yes.
I own commercial vehicles.
I don't currently, but I have owned vehicles with commercial.
What Jeff brought up first was a point that's always been an ire of me. The impervious surface and the huge amounts of parking on those apartment houses. If you look into the matter, they're never 100% full. And we used to design for peak loads, and that's kind of arcane. So we have a lot of excess parking, but we don't have a parking management plan in this city where we utilize on a basis that makes parking in those lots full by cooperating economically and by regulatory process. So I would appreciate it if they was looked into so that people who need to park off the street can park in empty parking spaces on private yet apartment-style buildings because they have excess parking.
Thank you for that suggestion, Vern. I support parking management of parking in both in our commercial districts and, well, mostly in our commercial districts.
I would just like to reiterate that it would be a severe hardship on many of the families in the community if we were to ban the commercial vehicles.
Well, they're already banned, it's a question of whether or not you...
Whether we enforce the ban on the commercial vehicles.
Right. And my sense is that the discussion about parking districts, parking management is going to be brought up next week in the context of Tacoma Junction and Old Town, and it gets over into kind of what to do about helping commercial areas. And so I think that discussion is a broader one and is an upcoming item that needs to be discussed.
That brings up the subject that we have problems with. I'm Jane Holmes, part of the Pinecrest Community Association and owners of the Darlene Apartments on the corner of Kansas and Eastern, and we have occasion where vehicles will come from the district over and park right next to the line and then walk out. Is that something that's legal? They can just park anywhere they want, even though they're not residents?
Yes.
It's legal.
Unless they park over 24 hours.
Or if they park on the parking lot for the,
Private property, that'd be different.
for the Darlene's apartments.
You'd be able to tow them as an owner of the apartment.
Okay, and we just call the police and...
No.
I hope. Okay. How about it?
The apartment parking lots is private. The owner has the right to tow a vehicle off that doesn't belong there. Like it's been mentioned here, there people that live in apartments can park in the lot. If somebody parks on private property that doesn't live there, the owner has a right to tow it, but the owner has to tow it. The police can't tow it. Does that help?
And just let me take this opportunity to make sure everybody knows Police Chief Ron Ricucci and Public Works Director Darrell Braithwaite, if you want to make sure everybody knows who you are, and Housing and Community Development Director Sarah Daines, and City Manager Barbara Matthews, and City Clerk Jesse Carpenter. And these two folks are here every time we meet, and the other three aren't usually here when we meet. But it's always very helpful to have them in the room because they provide a lot of expertise.
I think I was going to let my sister get the last word. Oh, yeah. Buddy Daniels, 19 Sherman Avenue. Tacoma Park. I just want to thank, as chairperson and a member of many committees in the city for many years, more than I want to admit, I'm getting old, the city staff and the city council for helping and certainly putting up with me. One suggestion I have when we're holding meetings in the room and you're doing your ward meetings, which are a fantastic idea, no question, you might have a ward map with the different citizens associations on them. Jesse's got those, and I also have them. So just in case there are any questions, because it does get a little complicated at times. But again,
and there used to be one out in the hall as you went into the council chambers, and it came down as part of the construction. So there are a number of things that have disappeared that will come back.
There's one in our basement. I hate to admit that, but there's one there too on my wall. But you can't find my wall right now. But that's another story. But thank you again for your help over the years.
Thank you.
All right, well, on to Ward 3 again, Byrne Kelly Circle Avenue. And I want to thank also the Public Works Department, especially during the last snowstorm, and the police chief. And the police came by and helped give some sand that got the road up to HMT cleared, and that was a blessing at 5 in the morning when I was working there. So thank you, Chief, even if you didn't know about it. A little bit about Ward 3 Circle Avenue and Hell's Bottom, which is the low point of Tacoma Park. We have drainage problems, and recently we had several water main breaks, and WSSC tells me that almost all the pipes in that area need to be replaced in the next 10 years, and that they're at the end of their lifespan. So expect more 6-inch water main breaks, maybe not 3 on the same weekend, but yeah, we've had that problem. We have some drainage problems too, but the city's been doing great things. Alona Blanchard with New Hampshire, you all have seen changes on New Hampshire. It's really a big benefit. Paul Grenier has come to Circle Woods and asked us about the streetscape along in front of Washington Christian McLaughlin School, and I've been working with a couple people on possibly ideas for that and approaching Dr. Washington about that. Dan built his new building. The community gardens opened up. We didn't get the tot lot up there that we were promised, so kids didn't have to walk all the way to Circle Woods. Clark had no trespassing signs put on the WSSC lot because he didn't want people parking there for a special event. I wish those signs would go away. I wish that site would be considered at the corner of Cockrell and Circle as another dog park alternative. It's much easier if we have to live with fences. I'd also like to know empirically how many incidents we actually have of dogs attacking people, because I've had dogs and I've lived in the city since '83, and I've seen dogs that get into scuffs with other dogs, but I don't think I've ever seen attacks or records of injury. So the dog issue, which is coming up later, is, I guess, a perennial issue that needs to just, if we don't regulate it, can we do whatever we want? It's another one of those questions. Once you put up the fences, the lawyers are involved. It gets ironic how we do things. And we're not nearly green enough as a city. We claim to be all this environmentally progressive, but we're not. We're not. And we should have alternative energies. We should be ahead of the curve. We're falling right behind the curve. That's not a Ward 3 issue. But, maybe we can harness some of that flooding power. But the other area we haven't talked about because it's not represented is the end of Sligo Mill and the commercial strip. When I met with Beth Habita when we got annexed and got unified into the city, we talked about lowering taxes and what this would bring to the city to have that commercial strip developed. And Dan's been about the only new building that's gotten near that strip. And that's an underutilized economic area that we need to maximize on. And that's one place where we should have a biodiesel plant up behind Advanced Auto or on one of those empty lots. And we should be greener, and we should be more commercial, and we should be making more taxes off of business and products that go out of here instead of paying them to fund such a great administration. Thank you.
Going to set the precedent that you can also use the table up front. I'm Roger Schlegel, 6512 Allegheny Avenue.
I'm Susan Healy, 6501 Allegheny. And do we get double time since we're double teaming? Sure. Okay.
I just wanted to thank you again, Mayor Williams, for running with this idea, and we just hope that more than anything else, it gives the council and all of us a sense of the things that are going on the neighborhood level, like some others have said. I wanted to mention to Byrne that we're trying to rebrand Hell's Bottom as Happy Valley. So, we're trying to get there.
It'll never happen.
Susie and I are conveying concerns largely from the WACO Association that Bruce Moyer helped compile, but also some that flood over into Pinecrest, no pun intended, and a little bit from Circle Woods. On the thank yous, we're very happy about the community garden. It's been a great way to increase foot traffic in that direction and a great community builder. A number of people talked about the improved police communication with people in the neighborhoods, the advisory board, a sense of increased patrols going on, and a lot of people appreciate the efforts that the city and others are doing to recruit and retain businesses in Old Town. So lots of thanks there. And Susan got a couple of thanks too.
The biggest thing, we wanted to thank Daryl Braithwaite. She spent a lot of time working with us, meeting with us individually to improve the lighting in our area. And I will say, consistently, people have reported they feel much safer, there's better foot traffic, there are fewer deposited stolen vehicles. So where's Daryl? Thank you so much. It's great. People are really happy about that.
And the demolishment of the 6614 Allegheny was a great improvement. We just had two bins kind of comments. One was things that were sort of for city staff to, obviously these can go, as Dan was saying, the process should be just to go through our council member, but just maybe this gives everybody just a sense of things on the ground. And then the second bin is things that we would like the city council to consider in the future. In terms of streets and sidewalks and transportation things, I had a comment that from one resident who, at the Poplar, New Hampshire light, he says he can listen to Riders on the Storm by the doors while waiting for the light to change. And he was wondering if the timing could be changed. I think that's a state issue. Susie has some others.
I'm going to see if I can speak as quickly as my teenagers. Okay, sidewalks. Allegheny Avenue in particular had a couple of issues. The upper part of Allegheny has, it's interspersed with telephone lines or poles right in the center of the sidewalk. So people are a little frustrated that you can't really safely travel up there. So wondering if we're on the improvement plan to do anything for sidewalks. So we're throwing that out as a question. There's a park, it's a Maryland State Park, like 6500 block. I think people would like to see a sidewalk extended along there to improve the foot traffic, and now that there's the community garden, that'll improve the traffic that way. Again, more eyes on the street.
You said 64?
6500. Allegheny.
This is the park
It is
at
all about
Highland
Allegheny
Bend.
Ave. No, I'm just kidding.
Across from Sue's house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a state park.
Dr. Schmidt Park.
There you go.
Okay, it's owned by the state, whatever it is, but anyway. And then there's on that block of Allegheny, 6500, there's a sewer, the sidewalk's all broken up, so there's a huge chunk that's still up. It used to have a cone on it. So just so we don't lose any small children. Although, it depends on your day. Well, those. So street issues, and I know you're saying this is a state issue. The section of Carroll Avenue between Columbia Avenue and the firehouse, I don't know if there was heavy drinking when they paved, but one side has a 6-inch gutter, the other side goes right up to the curb. So when they've gone to mark, they have done a preliminary marking, the street's uneven. So one side's more narrow than the other. So if that can be stopped before they have to actually remark, I don't know if you have connections to the state to. Bruce, I'm looking at you.
I'm taking notes down, all right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Jamie Raskin.
Yeah, so whatever connection you have would be nice. And then I think this will be resolved in the same comment you all made about they're looking for the pedestrian crosswalk in front of Roscoe's up there on Carroll Avenue, which will probably come back right when the...
It was supposed to go in a week ago, and this week hasn't gone in
The
yet,
weather's
but it's...
terrible, I don't know what happened.
It's that snowstorm this week.
Yeah.
And the last issue on the streets is at the top of Elm and Allegheny. It's a really dangerous turn that people can't see when you're pulling out either direction. So I think people feel that parking is too close to that curb or to the intersection, so whether it can be larger than what the normal is, that's another recommendation. All right. Street issues. And the last thing I think that people have concerns about, we've brought it up before, there are many houses that are vacant in our area or dilapidated, and does the city have a plan that can proceed with that? And even though residents might own it, nobody's in it, so it reduces your neighborhood, you know, fewer people on the street. So I think people are interested in some sort of step that the city could do to help force some sort of ownership or...
Sarah Danes is making motions back there. You're saying call it in?
If you identify...
Please.
Yeah, sorry. You know better. You should know better, too. If there's a property in Ward 3 that you're aware of that's been vacant, they just moved out, it's in the middle of foreclosure, please drop my office an email. What we do is we go through and we do targeted inspections. We basically run through each of the wards on a regular basis and try to keep an eye out for properties like that so that we can kind of stop things from getting worse. If there are problems that do develop because the property is vacant, then we kind of get a heads up on it rather than waiting till it's about to fall down like the property on Allegheny.
Sarah, what email address sent to?
cliftonb@tacomagov.org.
CLIFTON?
Yes.
B like...
B as in boy. And I will warn him to expect these.
And if you can just say a word about properties that, like the one on Allegheny, that seem to take forever for something to happen. If you can just say a couple things about the process there. And
In short, we get just as frustrated as everyone else about the time that's involved in addressing something. Because of the way the state law is written and the code is enforced at the local level, there's this very long and it seems cumbersome, but it makes sense, process that we have to go through when we identify a property like on Allegheny, where we have to go through and there are notification requirements. There's an opportunity for the property owner, once we identify who they are and we actually get in contact with them, to address the problems. And then there's another whole long process that we have to go through if we proceed to court or decide to take the initiative and to correct the problems ourselves. If it's something short and sweet, we can get it done in 2 weeks to 30 days, depending upon how responsive the property owner is. However, there are cases that we've been working on with for years that, not from a lack of interest on our part or a lack of initiative, but it just takes that long to serve the property owner, go through the whole court process, and get things resolved. And we've got a couple of cases. Ward 3 happens to be a lot of them are in Ward 3. And there are some there that will take a while to get through. If you want to get in touch with me afterwards, please swing by if there's a particular property, and I can kind of hopefully fill you in. But there are a couple of them in Ward 3 that we are working on. It may not look like it, but we are.
And I would suggest that enforcement isn't always necessarily the best approach, that maybe some neighborhood friendliness or discussion with the neighbors might be a good approach.
To expand on what Councilmember Siemens is saying is when folks do call in with specific complaints about a property, we try to encourage them to stop by next door, and if the property owner is just not in a position to mow their lawn or shovel their sidewalk or do repairs, or may not just have the same awareness of their conditions of their property, it's not a bad thing to go over and offer to help or to say, hi, do you need some assistance with something?
I think in some cases it's a question of, there's been a situation in their family or whatever that they're unable to do it. But I think also as soon as the government gets involved for some people, they become very resistant. And I think Sarah can probably testify to that better than I can.
Yes, and I'll take this opportunity to urge people to take a look at a new service, relatively new service, called My Tacoma Park. And if you go to tacomaparkmaryland.md.gov, on the left you'll see a little button for, it looks like one of those stickers you'd put on your car bumper that says My and then TK, PK. And it's a way you can enter these requests into a system, and the city then parcels out where the request is supposed to go. So you don't have to know that it's code enforcement that does X or it's public works that does Y. All you have to do is put in your request, and it'll get answered. Somebody will get back to you. And it's a way we can then track what's happening, because the council doesn't necessarily know that you've called so-and-so, but we can track through if you put in requests through this system. So it helps us keep track of how the city's doing as well.
I do have two comments. One of them is that coming from California, I find Maryland very enforcement adverse. And sometimes I feel like there's a misbalance, because to some extent, if you never enforce, or if you make your enforcement systems so onerous that it takes 2 to 3 years to enforce them, then people know that they can continue to break the rules and no one will ever catch up with them. That said, I think going through mediation processes and having the city try to engage with people, and if you're comfortable going to neighbor is definitely the place to start. I don't think you should start with the biggest hammer in the world, but it would be great if after you had been through that process, you didn't have to then spend another 3 years trying to get a building that has, is essentially a danger in the community addressed. So that's my first comment. My second comment is I can't quite imagine where you're talking about, where the parking creates a little bit of a problem at the top of an intersection, but I do know that there is, you can't park within 25 feet of a stop sign. So we've had that problem a couple of times in Ward 2, and the police have come out and put warning tickets out. It's typically, there are people in the neighborhood that are parking there, and you put warning tickets out.
Stop sign on Elm, that's why the problem is there. They need a paint line.
Yeah, Elm is through, and then Allegheny dead ends at the top.
It's a site distance problem and a narrow road.
I've almost got hit.
Yeah, it's,
So they
You
need
know-
parking stripes and no parking from here to corner. That's the solution.
That's doable.
what was your comment?
That's doable. It's something to talk about.
Yeah, so I guess if there's normally a 10-foot, or, whatever the distance is,
I believe it's 25 feet
Yeah.
typically from a stop sign to where parking begins. If you didn't have you're having
but
a
there's no
problem
stop
that-
sign.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just for something to look at.
And it's 10 feet from a driveway as well, technically.
Right.
From a personal driveway? 10 feet.
Well, that just wiped out half the parking on our street. Onto another subject, one of the other concerns that a lot of the neighbors had was the Public Works building. And I think it was understood back in November that that was going to be tabled, and I think people were caught by surprise that it was proceeding again. So, throwing it out there that people aren't necessarily supportive of it without enough research, and I think somebody else already spoke to that we shouldn't, our finances shouldn't support us doing that if we don't have all the funds up front. So I think people are concerned about our being a little more fiscal responsible.
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking about the lower part of the dog bone, as Dan described it, we have a lot of families there who do feel stretched by the taxes, and there is interest in a process over the next few months to look at the various priorities in case big cuts have to happen. And so I know that there's obviously so much on your plates, but I just wanted to reemphasize that if there is a way to put together a process of kind of reviewing parts of the budget and getting community input on priorities, I think people would appreciate that had been done if cuts had to be addressed.
I just want to comment on Public Works and something that's been brought up about borrowing money. And so you all know I've said a number of times I've been very critical of the Public Works facility and whether we should do that project or not. I think that should be looked at, but that shouldn't necessarily be connected to if we decide to do it or not decide to do it. Like I get to vote against doing it, and if everyone else votes for it, I lose, then we can figure out how to pay for it. It may make sense to borrow the money to pay for it. That's a financing question. Just like when you buy a house, you don't always save the money up to buy the house, right? You get a mortgage because you can't come up with the lump sum of money right then, and the financing might actually make sense. And it also allows you to have the payment for that facility, the useful life of that facility, which might be 20 years or 40 years, or I guess the current facility we've had for 50 years. It actually allows that the cost of that use of the facility to be spread out over time and shared by the people who are living in the city into the future, as opposed to paying for it at once. I'd be happy to talk more about that with people, but I think just because we don't have money doesn't necessarily mean that we have the money in the bank. That just like an individual doesn't mean we shouldn't borrow it in some cases. So I just want to be clear about that. Although I totally agree with you on the public work facility that we should look at that very closely, and it may be something we don't want to do at this time.
Just a few grab bag items because we've gone over. There's an effort underway that seems to be stalled. Some residents said to do something useful with a small triangular space at the top of Allegheny near Elm to create a kind of a tot lot and improve the appearance. And they're looking for some help from city staff to jumpstart that process. And then on public safety, I think folks in the Waco area are looking to get help from the police to reestablish some citizen patrols, particularly during periods when it's likely to be crime waves, like in the fall, just to help us help ourselves in that sense, talking about citizen patrols. And then one other thing is at New Hampshire, at the top of Orchard, there's a proposal in for a car wash, and some residents expressed concerns about the environmental impacts of that on the watershed, given that there's already a car wash at Jiffy Lube right down the street, whether we really need to be doing another one.
And if I can just say on that one, I don't remember when we had the presentation, but we did have a presentation on that car wash, so that there should be the agenda item on the city website that has a lot of information about that. And if people haven't seen that, maybe we can email the information so that people can take a look at that if they want to. So there would be the link to the council session when we had the briefing on the car wash, and all of the associated documents that are on the website as well. So that might help some people.
And Bruce?
Yeah.
My recollection or my understanding is that the status of that is that it's under review at Park and Planning for site plan. Sarah, maybe you know the answers to this. Sarah Danes. We're talking about the car wash at the top of Orchard. It got set back. Was it because of site review?
I believe that's the case. We can check and send you an email tomorrow.
Okay, I'd appreciate an update on that to see where it sits in the process. And I had a question for you, Roger, when you're talking about the tot lot on Allegheny. Do you mean the one as you come down Elm and then there's a jog in Allegheny and it's that little tiny chunk there?
There are tire swings right now, and there was some work being done on a plan to upgrade and improve that.
I'm kind of waiting for that plan to come back. I know Daryl and I are waiting for that plan to be formalized by neighbors.
Okay, so the ball's in the neighbors' court right now.
That's my understanding.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just comment also on the car wash. Because on that agenda item, there's detail in there about the requirements, and if people are concerned about the watershed specifically. And there's a whole other question about whether people should even spend the energy to wash their cars, period, in any way, right? But in terms of the watershed, there's like very strict requirements about the water staying on site, how it's reused, how the filtering system that the business has to have in place, so that basically nothing leaves the site that's not normal clean water.
Going to wash your car, a car wash is a better option than your driveway.
It's highly regulated.
It's
So I just think the information's there if people are concerned.
Can I just add one thing to that car wash area?
Yeah.
Back when we did the master plan, there was supposed to be a walkway between, was a right-of-way, and there was supposed to be a walkway put on that lot on one side of it, and once they did their presentation, that's disappeared altogether. So it would be nice to have a way to walk through there up to New Hampshire after you develop New Hampshire.
Yeah, we're very interested in being able to walk to New Hampshire. It's actually equidistant, or a little closer than Carroll. There are actually some of those paper streets that have gotten taken over by private growth, undergrowth and things, such as part of Westmoreland, that I used to use with my kids, and I can't use it anymore. So.
I think we have to go back and look at the agenda item, because I remember something about the right-of-way. I think there actually is a that they talked about the right-of-way having to be preserved when we saw that presentation. I don't remember exactly, but we should relook at it.
Councilmember Siemens has gone to that, and it's Monday, May 9th, 2009.
May 4th.
May 4th, which is all the information on the website. 2009.
And I also looked at the master plan, and there is a path marked in the master plan.
Wonders of modern technology. Thank you, too. Others?
Anybody else?
No.
No? Steve?
Actually, since this was brought up, I was one of the coordinators of the WACO Neighborhood Patrol, and we, and it's...
You want to tell us who you are?
Oh, I'm Steve Smith. I live on 6617 Westmoreland. Sorry, thank you. And it is currently suspended due to declining participation. And one of the things that there was a feeling that there wasn't much support from the city, that we did have at one point a meeting with the police chief and talking about community initiatives, but then it didn't seem that a lot came of that. So I do think it's important to have some partnership between the city and the citizens on safety. And there seemed to be a lot of mixed messages from the city on whether, neighborhood patrols were useful or if they would be supported or so on. I mean, they were supported in the sense that, we would call into the dispatcher, and sometimes they knew what was going on, sometimes they didn't. But I think that's something that's, on the safety standpoint, would be nice to reopen a discussion about that. So.
And that reminds me that one of the things that I wanted to do, and I hope that it'll come out of these board meetings, is to have an opportunity to get the leadership of the neighborhood associations together so that there can be some sharing of ideas and concerns and ways of operating, so that some neighborhood associations who have things that work can share them with others who are wondering how they can make that work. And so as we start to go through these ward nights, what I want to do is ask that any of the leadership of any of the neighborhood associations would be open and willing to having maybe a quarterly meeting with me, something like that, where we can talk about some of these ideas and share resources and concerns, and maybe come up with some good ideas and get them working in wider areas. So if you all can either, if you are the leaders, or send that word back to leaders in the neighborhood associations, and I'll try and pull that together in the next couple of months.
And Bruce, similarly, and kind of on a similar vein, we have a strategic plan in the city that covers the whole city, and it might be good to think about a strategic plan for the wards, so that those things that are in the minds of the neighborhood associations, or that we think are important, can get put into a kind of a mini strategic plan. Oh, I'll stop now.
Okay. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate your participation here, and we look forward to more of these nights, and it won't be too long before we get back to Ward 3, and we'll welcome you back again, and appreciate it. Thanks.
For Tacoma Park's Affordable Housing Initiative. The funds, which total approximately $300,000, have been set aside by the county for projects that would support the city's housing goals. And Sarah and I have reviewed a couple of options, and we have met with the county staff in DHCA. And so our proposal to the council tonight is that we use these funds for weatherization and related energy-efficient upgrades that would benefit multifamily rental facilities. As proposed, the county would administrate the program and monitor the projects for federal regulations and requirements, and we would be responsible for marketing the availability of the funds to Tacoma Park property owners, rental property owners. We believe that this proposal is in keeping with the Council's strategic and affordable housing plans, which emphasize sustainability, environmental and energy consciousness, and the support of public and private efforts to preserve affordable housing. So we briefly discussed this proposal with a number of housing nonprofit organizations that currently own properties in Tacoma Park, just to make sure that they would be interested in having such a program. And we found that there was an overwhelming positive response to this program. Copies of the support letters that we retained from the nonprofit organizations are attached to your packet. We believe that this proposal fills a gap that currently exists. We have been advised that the MEHOP funds, that's the Multifamily Energy Efficiency and Housing Affordability Program that is currently administered by the state, which has approximately $9.2 million in funding, is not especially geared for small grant requests. And therefore, because most of our properties in Tacoma Park have between 6 and 40 units, we thought that we needed to develop a program that would address a need that is felt for the small to mid-sized landlords. So we're looking for your comments on the proposal, and we've also attached a resolution to your packet if you're in favor of this program.
And I guess one question that comes to mind is that there was a law that was passed in the state legislature last year about making energy improvement loans to properties, and there were problems with how the bill ended up. And I know that this was one of the proposals that the city put forth to the Maryland Municipal League was to fix that bill. And I know that that's going forward on a number of fronts to try and address that. And I was wondering if the funds from that are a possible source for using in this type of thing, whether if we did this with the CDBG funds, if it could also be joined with that or any other program where there are ways to make energy improvements with, that one was with loans to the property. And the problem was that you couldn't attach the lien for the loan the way the bill ended up. And so therefore, nobody's going to use it.
Was that for multifamily or single family?
That may have been single family. I don't know whether there are similar things for multifamily or whether this is filling a void and it's a vacuum because there are no other program, or whether you know of anything else that's a possible thing to kind of pull in multiple sources.
To our knowledge, at this point in time, our proposal would fill a vacuum because of the size of the buildings that this would predominantly benefit. They're too small for the program that Linda was talking about, and a majority of the other resources that the county has received from the state and the federal government, I believe, for weatherization types of improvements are targeted for single-family homes. So currently, it's offered as a means of filling that void. In terms of using those resources to leverage additional resources for these types of improvements, based on our experience and my past experience in working with nonprofit housing providers specifically, they are very comfortable with and attuned to using resources from one pot to leverage dollars from another pot and to fill gaps. For example, the property that MHP owns in Ward 4 on the corner of Maple and Ritchie. If you look at the funding stream for that particular project, there must be like 4 dozen different funding sources. So while that's wasn't part of our original intent, it is something that could be used in the future, assuming that there are resources available at that time.
Questions? Councilmember Clay.
I think this is a great idea to use affordable housing funds for weatherization. It has payoffs in the immediate and long down the line for people who live in these places. One question, just about the economics. So, if I live in a rental place and I pay my own utilities, I'm of course really happy to have you come in and do the weatherization. I know from my experience in AmeriCorps that it is harder to get landlords to approve weatherization projects where the landlord doesn't pay the utilities and the weatherization accrues to the renter, but it is possible. We were able to do it. In that situation, the affordability of the unit accrues, directly to the pocket of the person who lives in the unit, and there's a benefit that accrues to to the landlord because their unit is now a more desirable unit to rent because it has energy efficient, appliances, window, whatever it is. And it's something that you can market in terms of cost effectiveness of renting that unit. Of course, we don't have a competitive rental market, but if we did, it would be something that you would appreciate. But if the landlord pays the utilities, which is significant in a larger part of Tacoma Park, in that situation, there should be a built-in incentive for the landlord to put money into weatherization and energy efficiency improvements, because where the landlord pays the utilities, the financial benefit accrues back to the landlord. And when you have situations like this, like the bill that Bruce was just talking about, where you have a funding mechanism that's set up so that somebody can loan the money and then pay it off, or you have companies that do that work, then that's great, because then the savings on the utilities then essentially pay for the work that's being done. So from a public policy perspective, I would prioritize buildings where the benefit to where the benefit accrues most directly to the renter, because when we're spending public tax dollars, it seems like a better choice to put those public dollars in use that way, rather than to use them in a situation where there's actually an economic mechanism that should incentivize the weatherization of the other units.
Well, I would agree, and I think the trend has been, certainly in the last few years, that many landlords are approaching us and trying to find out how to separately meter, the utilities. And in case you don't know, there is a process, if they're under rent stabilization, there is a process by which you have to roll back the rent. Whatever the average utility cost has been for the last 24 months, and roll back the rent, that amount of money, and then start from there, from square one, once you separately meter the utility. So I think what we're finding is that most landlords who are concerned at all about energy efficiency are the landlords that would probably, in this process, try to separately meter a utility in the property. So, and therefore have the tenant responsible for the utility costs and have the rollback of the rent.
So what you perceive is that they would ultimately, not only would they do this, they would participate in the weatherization program if offered the opportunity, but they would continue to pursue the rollback or the individual metering, which is incredibly expensive and difficult to do.
Right.
And I mean, how many people realistically do that? If I owned a multifamily unit property here, unless I was going to convert it to condos, I don't think I would invest in.
Well, the cost to the landlord, you see, is getting to be so high that they're finding that it's advantageous to separately meter the utilities, so that they are no longer responsible for that increase in the cost, and so the tenants are responsible for the cost. The rent is rolled back, and during that process,
the damage has been done on utility prices, though, and so. And now they can do a petition, a petition for return, which should take those things into account. So,
right.
Just in terms of the dynamics, I personally think that if we're going to expend public dollars on this, I think it's a great idea that I would look to do the buildings that where the tenants paid the. I mean, do you think that's not feasible?
No, I think it's feasible. Absolutely. And, certainly all the properties that, all the nonprofit properties that we've talked to, when they've done their renovations or are in the plans to do the renovations, they have been separately metering the property. So the tenants are responsible for the utilities, and they would be gaining the direct benefit from energy efficiency upgrades.
Well, and so let me add a caveat. Even in the situation where you had nonprofits who were group metered, the nonprofits that we work with as a community turn around and put the money back into the purchase and preservation of affordable housing in the community, which I would also consider that to be a priority project, because there's return on the investment that comes back to the community there, and not so much this mechanism that would exist in the market to incentivize them to do the weatherization themselves.
So I just want to be clear, this is only the CDGB funds associated with affordable housing. There's other CDGB block grant funds that we get that we've used for a variety of, we have a whole process by which people.
Correct.
Okay.
These would be just those funds that have been set aside for capital improvements in this yet undefined amorphous category of affordable housing. We would still continue to do the public service projects, and the reality is we'd be able to speed up the process in terms of getting those funds out to those particular groups, because we would be spending ahead.
And what happens if, so that the county's administering the funds and the funds don't get used in a year, so not enough property owners apply for the money? Like, do we lose that money, or does it roll over to the next year to be given as grants? Or
it could roll over, or we could come back to the city council and say, we thought we had a great idea and we thought we'd spend these funds down in a timely fashion, but frankly, we've got $200,000 left. Do we want to reprogram it? And the county would give us that option of taking the money back, if you will, and reprogramming it for another project.
I totally agree with Councilmember Clay. I have the same questions, that there should be priority given to, on the eligibility, nonprofits first, and also properties that where tenants pay the utilities. Those prior, I'm totally supportive of that also. Can the county could we ask the county to prioritize those?
We can do that. We can also target our marketing or outreach efforts to those particular properties.
Thank you, Mayor. I thank you for bringing this back to us after our interest in using the CDBG money for affordable housing. I have a concern that this has the potential of benefiting the property owners and benefiting the tenants to a lesser degree. And I wonder if we shouldn't consider putting in a stipulation in the grant that they must continue to have the property available as affordable housing, rental housing, for a period of time. It's not such a worry with the nonprofits, but for the private owners of rental property, that I could see where they could upgrade their property, new windows, new heaters, new air conditioning, and then turn around and sell the building, and it could be a single-family house that they end up selling.
Yeah, I think that's already a requirement by the county, that they be maintained as rental property.
The use of block grant funds are limited to projects which provide direct benefit to low and moderate income individuals. So the target audience that you're referencing as far as the renters, it would be those individuals or households that fall within those income guidelines. And then they have to maintain their affordability. The agreements that the county generally enters into are for extended periods of time, 10, 15, 25, 40 years in length. And they have to maintain that affordability throughout the term of the note.
Okay. I'm not as supportive of prioritizing the nonprofit organizations, although I think they do good work in the city, and I appreciate that. I would be, I think, more supportive of larger buildings with more units. If we were able to be a catalyst to get a large building to do the work. We may not have sufficient funds to do the whole project, but we may make, as I say, may be a catalyst in getting them to do a project. It would end up benefiting more tenants.
Well, one of the things that we discovered when we talked to some of the nonprofits is that the MIHA funds that are available through the state is particularly geared toward larger buildings, and that money can easily be accessed. And the way the program is set up, it does seem as if they are trying to target larger buildings. And for that reason, we thought that something that was geared towards smaller buildings would help fill that gap.
The other point I'd make is that the nonprofit organizations probably have grant streams that they are used to using, whereas I think the majority of our rental housing in Tacoma Park are private owners of small number of units, typically single-family homes that have been converted to multifamily use, and they might need more assistance than the nonprofits do.
Right. What we're proposing, however, is would not be, the funds would not go for single-family properties, because the county has resources available for those types of properties already. So what we would, if the council decides to proceed with this, it would be targeted for the larger rental facilities and not those that may be 1 or 2 units and all of that. The other thing that you should be aware of is that because these are federal funds available through the Community Development Block Grant Program, there are a huge number of requirements and regulations that the property owners have to go through. And frankly, looking at it from a small property owner, 1 or 2 units, the paperwork would give me a headache if I had any experience with it at all. So we anticipate the larger property, this being more cost-effective for the larger properties, and in the nonprofit world, frankly, may have the heads up in terms of, 1, having to already comply with those regulations, and 2, being familiar with some of the paperwork that will be required.
I appreciate your homework that led to your answers, and based on what you've said, I would support the resolution, and with the addition of the nonprofit targeting, prioritizing the nonprofits.
In terms of your question regarding the single-family rehab loans, we are promoting that program to many of the people who call in, and also through our code enforcement, the exterior survey of the city. Whenever our code enforcement officer goes out and finds that there is a property that needs sufficient repair on the outside, they always give them the brochure that we have on this program. So we do get calls on that, and we send out applications quite readily to the single-family homeowners that need energy-efficient upgrades as well.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Robinson?
I'm curious, I might have missed this, but the implementation, a small apartment building feels that they would like to take advantage of these funds. And do they approach you and say, we'd like to be part of this program? Do they approach HCD?
We're going to be doing an outreach and certainly sending a notification to all the landlords in Tacoma Park regarding the program.
Okay, and if they come, are you going to evaluate based on need or appropriate the need of a specific project and say, yep, we're going to fund this project and then we're going to fund it?
Frankly, we don't have the internal staff capacity to do that, and that would be one of the responsibilities of the county in terms of going through the whole application process, doing the inspection, doing the contract work, and overseeing the actual work itself. Okay. So what we will basically be doing is marketing it, working with the county to identify particular projects, and making referrals, if you will, as calls come in to us, to the county.
Okay. Is there information that's out there about the difference between an efficient unit in the building and an inefficient unit based on the amount that somebody would pay for energy use? Can you use that as a guideline so that if somebody, two 6-unit buildings show up, one, the average energy use is $80 a month, and the other is $50 a month. Seems like you'd want to go after the $80 a month one because it's more inefficient.
Well, one of the things that is usually funded through a program like this, the first step is an energy audit of the property. And through an energy audit, in fact, some of the nonprofits that answered our questions on the programming indicated that that would be what they would do first, is do an energy audit to find out, what professionally would be needed to upgrade the property.
Are you going to kind of track that to see what an efficient unit in Tacoma Park, what qualifies as an efficient unit in Tacoma Park? There might be a value to all of us to know that.
We had not made any plans to do that. I'm not quite sure how we would go about doing it, but we can do some investigation.
You might keep your ears and eyes open on that one. And the last question, which I may have missed, is if a landlord has, or property owner has, is paying for the energy use for his building, but would like to have it individually metered, could this money be paid for that transition or that individual metering?
I would think so. I would think that would be, definitely something that would be, because certainly the usage of utilities is decreased once, separately metering is put into place.
Okay, so the scenario there then is the landlord's paying an average of $1,000 a month for electricity. It costs $30,000 to individually meter. He's able to perhaps use $30,000 of this grant to individually meter his building. After it's done, the rents are rolled back based on how much, I think you said 24 months of average energy use. That's how much the rents are moved back. So the property owner's in a position of making the building more energy efficient, being helped with that, and after the process is over, the tenants have their rent reduced by, let's say it's $100, but their bill's only $50, so it's a benefit to the individual tenants, right? I'm just trying to kind of play out the scenario here.
That is the rationale
That's the rationale.
for the code, right? For that part of the code, that the reduction of the rent should cover the cost of the utility.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I do support this.
I'm very enthusiastic about supporting this. I think it's a great use of the money for both affordable housing and for environmental reasons. I'm not sure I understood some of the discussion, so I have some follow-up questions. There was a discussion about whether we can ensure that the building remains as an affordable unit. And I thought you said, yes, that there would be provisions that remain affordable. So my follow-up question had to do with, here in Tacoma Park, we have rent stabilization. So while some of the buildings, like the MHP one, some of the others, are affordable in the Montgomery County sense, they follow those rules. They have some units that are below market. Will we still, in those units that are not covered under those agreements, like an MHP type agreement, but those that were still under our Tacoma Park rent stabilization law, will they continue to be, and will we be able to do the same thing, that is, insist that they maintain it under that for some period of time? Rather, this is, in other words, a concern that I thought I heard about condo conversion. That is, they do this renovation, they get some money for the energy efficiency, they find other money to, put in new counters and new appliances, and then, the year after that, they turn it into condos.
As long as the financing remains in place, they are required to comply with the low and moderate income benefits of the CDBG program. So unless they were to make all of that money go away by repaying it, those low and moderate income and affordability requirements would remain in place.
Does that take them out of rent stabilization?
Not necessarily. They would have to submit a specific request to be exempted from rent stabilization, which then would require them to document that they are under an agreement to rent to individuals within defined income guidelines and at affordable rates, again, defined by the federal government. And that exemption would remain in place as long as that agreement was intact. So if, for example, someone accessed these funds, applied for rent, an exemption for rent stabilization, and then turned around and sold it the next year, they would then fall back, they would then revert, and the property remained rental, they would revert back to the requirements under the rent stabilization program, and the rents would be adjusted accordingly. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I was hoping for something a little stronger than that, because I don't, you know, MHP has these, we have several MHP things in which a substantial number of the units are rented for considerably higher rents than they would be under rent stabilization.
In many of those properties, the rents are tied to the income of the individual, so it's 30% of their income. With another entity.
It's often 60% of the, some of them are 60% of the median income.
Area median income, but the rents that they actually pay are 30% of their income.
Yes.
So the
I
rents may
understand
be,
Right.
But you raise an interesting issue, and I think we'll probably have to look at that. I mean, there is a possibility of changing the rent stabilization law to make the exemption of, you know, those properties that have contracts with governmental entities, you know, maybe change it a little bit to, you know, maybe redefine it. But I think we'll have to do a little research on that.
Right.
Yeah.
And if they did access these funds and they did go through some of the steps that Councilmember Snipper was laying out, and they did say, for instance, go condo, the requirement would then be that they would have to pay back the money before they could do that?
they were to sell the property, if the financing was still in place and the agreement was still active, yes.
And our assumption is that it would go back into, because it would repay the money in this fund, it would assume that at that point in the future, this fund would still be available and the money would go back into this program as opposed to who knows where, or it would just go back in, it would go back to the county, it would go back to the federal government?
It would go back to the county, or it could go back to the federal government if the funds weren't spent down in a timely manner. But typically what happens is the funds are recycled for similar types of projects. Yeah.
It's not a revolving loan fund.
I know.
I would think it would go back to the feds. It's a grant.
It depends on how the county's got it structured, because if they get repayments that come in and they're not turning them back to the county then, or to the federal government.
It's a grant, though. You guys describe this as a grant, not a loan.
Right, but the terms of the, I need to get more information from them, but I think the terms of the grant have to remain in place for a certain time period. So if they default, for lack of a better word, on the terms and conditions of the grant prior to the expiration of the grant agreement, then it would have to be repaid. If they keep everything intact and they continue to comply with it during the term of the grant agreement, then the funds would disappear and they would not have to repay it.
I have a follow-up question related to the rent stabilization. Just that, are the requirements to get this money so onerous that realistically, like, the private landlord of a rent-stabilized building isn't even going to apply for them? Because do they actually have to show the income levels of everyone who's in the apartments, which is like a huge thing, and then they actually have to...
And they have to income verify probably every
Right.
year.
And then the rents actually have to be 30% of whatever that income.
It depends on how it's structured.
Seems unlikely.
Most people don't really like to do it. In Minnesota and Iowa, worked with a program similar to this with similar block grant requirements. And frankly, a majority of the people accessing those funds in that particular region were for-profit housing providers, not nonprofits, because the nonprofit world wasn't as prevalent there as it is here. So it is something that a lot of people aren't crazy about doing, but they do it if they are interested in obtaining the funds. For example, the county does multifamily housing rehab, and not all the people that access those funds are nonprofit housing providers. They're for-profit providers.
But do they...
And they have the same requirements.
But they don't have to abide by the...
It's the same source of funds.
No, but they don't have to abide by rent stabilization laws in the rest of the county.
No.
Okay.
Frankly, the rent stabilization requirements are on a scale of what would be the most challenging to satisfy. Those rent stabilization requirements are probably lower in the totem pole than the income verification requirements for the tenants.
Have we covered this sufficiently so that we can go forward with a resolution on this? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we now go to our last item this evening, which is, the discussion of the implementation plan for the ADA and sidewalk studies. And I'm tempted to say at the beginning of this one that my thought when I saw what we got from staff was that it was an attempt to provide language to address the concerns that had been expressed by some council members last time, that there were these criteria for how to rank order this, but that there was a lot of ability to adjust that once we adopt the criteria, so that we can deal with changed circumstances or circumstances that we think are worthy of making some initial use of funds for projects, that we can kind of reorder this, but that we essentially need to adopt a set of standards in order to have the database to go by, but this doesn't lock the database. It makes it able to be adjusted for whatever reason.
Correct.
So I just thought I wanted to get that on the table first so that we didn't have the same discussion all over again about, but I think X belongs at the top of the list and it isn't on the list because of the way these criteria work. So do I have understanding of that, agreement of that from my colleagues, or do you want to go through that argument again?
Can you just say that one more time, Bruce?
That the adoption of these standards doesn't mean that there can't be reasons to not follow a particular rank order based on these standards, that there's the ability to advance particular things for particular reasons, whether it's reasons that we already know or reasons that we will know in the future because of changed circumstances.
So what are you suggesting? We not talk about this?
I'm just suggesting that tonight we don't go through the whole, this particular one is, it's crazy that it's on page 2 of the database. It should be up on page 1 because this is a priority in my ward and I want this one to be done, and we have to make the criteria fit it so that this one moves to the top of the list. I don't think we need to go through that.
Sure, yours are at the top.
Mine are everywhere in the list.
Oh, okay.
The council is being asked to consider, provide some feedback to us on 3 different issues this evening. One is the resolution, which sort of does what Mayor Williams is talking about, and sort of tries to address the issues that came up during the work session discussion several weeks ago. The other 2 items deal with the implementation of the planned ADA and sidewalk improvements in terms of contracting with an outside vendor to make that happen. Frankly, we don't have the internal staff resources to do the required survey work, engineering work, design work, construction oversight. And that's addressed somewhat briefly in your memorandum. We've identified a couple of contracts that have been entered into at the county level that we think are appropriate fixes, and if this is something you would like us to proceed with, we can come back at a later date, probably in early to mid-February, with a vendor that we think is an appropriate fit. The cost of that particular contract for services is considered eligible under the speed camera program and would be sort of folded into the whole overall program cost. So you'd have funding set aside for actual construction and implementation, and then funding set aside or earmarked for all the soft costs associated with making a sidewalk or an ADA improvement happen. And then this third thing that we'd like some feedback on is to provide some direction in terms of whether or not you'd like to proceed or investigate the feasibility of using, I always get this backwards, alternative construction techniques or materials to provide for sidewalks that have a permeable surface. So, okay.
So, I guess, first, I'd like to get some feedback or clarification on the point that I was trying to make, that I was hoping would make it so that we wouldn't have the same discussion as last time all over again and still not be able to resolve it. But to be able to go ahead and adopt these criteria, which seem to me to be reasonable. They are not going to fit every circumstance, and we have the flexibility to be able to reorder some things based on whatever we see fit. So, Councilmember Clay and then Councilmember Snipper.
I think I disagree with you, but I'm not sure. So I am not prepared at this time to say, with sort of the limited exception of the woman who came today that's already got a petition signed, that I feel like, I have this list, a particular list that has to be implemented and that I want to argue about them. What I am prepared to talk about today is more about process. And I would have to have essentially a spreadsheet that I could interact with on my computer to see what valuing different things does to address it, because when I look at what we have now, what I do know is that it doesn't reflect what I know experientially are the highest need areas and the places that I think would have the most initial buy-in, essentially. I mean, I feel like, what I'm interested in is talking about a more expanded process that maybe starts with, my suggestion would be kind of an overlay map of sort of main corridors might be like a way to start, and then see how this point system informs that. And then the second thing is that maybe the spread of the points is okay within each section, but I don't necessarily, with the exception of the ADA compliance score, which is like 17, 11, and 3, the other ones are 4 2s and 0s or 4 3s, 2s and 1s, where maybe within that, those would be weighted. For example, the presence of having a sidewalk now or not seems maybe more important than some of the other issues. Whether or not you have existing right-of-way is probably one of the hugest costs, so that might be more important than the connectivity score, for example. So that's, I guess, what I would like to talk about is how that process is going to function. And I don't particularly feel like I have the kind of skill set to do this on the fly right now. There are better data mathematicians on the council even than I am. But I do know that process-wise, I feel like this doesn't capture, it's not going to capture the experiential knowledge and some of the politics and other issues around where sidewalks get installed.
I have a related, I see, a related concern that you've illustrated nicely, actually, by your discussion, which is I'm very concerned when we do the roads, for example, in Tacoma Park, there is a score, just like this score, that's been generated by somebody. Doesn't matter who, but it's considered legitimate, and that's how we prioritize the repairs of the streets. And it would be very tempting for the council to say, well, actually, this block would be, I'd love to have this street repaved sooner than this other street because I have, constituents who are urging me to do that. And if we started down that road on the roads, we'd spend a lot of time on the repaving of our streets. We've been able to avoid that by just saying, no, we have this rating system, and we're just going to go with it. And every once in a while, it will inevitably not fit what our preferred order would be, and timing, and so on. And I'm very grateful that we have that for roads. So my concern is that we follow that model for the sidewalks, not the model that you were implying, in which we, investigate reweighting. I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this. Investigate reweighting of this score so it fits our priors, in which case we would spend hours and our constituents would come and argue about this, that, or the other thing. As we heard tonight, a lot of discussion about which sidewalk should be done first and why. I would really like to just avoid that because it's a kind of a zero-sum game. If you put in a sidewalk in one place, somebody else who thinks theirs should come first is going to be upset.
Isn't that why you became a politician, so you would make those decisions?
I'm hoping to make the policy decision, thank you, make the policy decision, as you often urge, which is to develop a policy and then try to follow the policy as closely as possible and avoid the politics part. So for me, I would love to find a legitimating organization that would say, here's the weighting to use or the scoring to use or the method for developing the formula, and it's common or whatever justification we could use. It's been recommended by the Sidewalk Engineers Association of America, whatever the legitimating organization is, and then not get into this issue of, well, I actually think that if we weighted this a little differently, it would make the 6 sidewalks in my ward that I think should be done first come out ahead, just so we don't have to do that. So my concern is I would love to try to figure out a policy that would get us away from arguing about which particular sidewalk should go first.
And I'll just say real quickly that I hear that, and there's a certain allure to that argument. I did think, as you were talking, that one difference here is that the street work we're talking about is maintaining existing infrastructure, and this one is about basically changing existing or adding new. And so it is different. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you. First, I will say that I, like Councilmember Sniffer, would like to avoid making the decisions and throw it onto the list that we have. However, I have to agree with Councilmember Clay that there are some problems with the prioritization that we have in this list. And I think that when the contractor was in and presented this list to the council, they themselves said, yes, there were, it was a good first pass, but there are some things that could be done to improve the list. I think back to that meeting and the lack of sidewalks on Geneva Avenue, where there's a daycare and a church located across the street from each other. every day, and I'm sure that Ms. Braithwaite knows, every day there are a dozen or more toddlers who are walking in the street, either linked together holding hands with supervision, obviously, or in strollers, because some are not even toddling. And they're either going on over to Hefner Park or on up Ritchie Avenue just for an outing for the day. And they do that at least once a day, sometimes twice a day. And it's a real problem to have those young people walking in the middle of the road with supervision. I mean, they're not in the middle of the road, but they are walking on the road surface, knowing the way that some vehicles travel through the neighborhood. And again, it's not a criticism of the work that was done. I think it was a great first pass. I was really impressed with the work that the contractor did to get us to this point. But I'm reticent to just sign off on saying that we should just use this as the guide to how we put in the sidewalk. So without getting into more specifics, I don't know how we go about doing it. I don't want to be the one that sits here and juggles the numbers to make it happen. But maybe we need a second pass from the experts with some more input from the council.
If I might, I think one of the things that with the two different kinds of studies that were done on this, one of them, Councilmember Snipper, you talk about the street study, which is a fairly precise engineering study of a fixed thing. I think the closest comparison is the ADA portion of this study, because it's, the ramp doesn't qualify, the surface isn't smooth. Whatever those things are, that's a fairly, I think you can rank those pretty well. You can just say these don't meet the standards. That's part of the reason that our recommendation as staff is to, as a first move, is to go for the curb ramp items, to get things moving, get something done that's very needed and isn't really a debatable issue. These are areas where we're in violation. The difficulty with the others are, we didn't have it down to a survey level for all of the other walking paths. And so until we would get to that point, I don't think we could come up with the kind of ranking system that would be comparable to the street survey. There's also, as Councilmember Clay has mentioned, some differences of opinion about what are the connector routes and what are the priority connector routes. Nevertheless, we did spend way too many hours looking at connector routes through the city as overlays on these maps and talking some of that out. So that certainly was why a lot of the rankings came out the way they did. So I just kind of wanted to throw out that in terms of something that's comparable to the street survey, probably the ADA portion is more closer to that for the information that we have.
So I share the concerns, I think, that Councilmember Siemens summarized, in that I'd love it if we just had like a ranking system that was widely agreed upon like we have for the street survey. But we don't have that unless you can tell me that we have that. I'd feel uncomfortable going by this ranking system, which was a best effort, but as the consultants even said, if you change one thing a little bit in the weighting this way or that way, because you have a slightly different take on it, it rejiggers everything. At the same time, I want the process to be non-politicized. I don't really want to be lobbied by individuals. So one possibility that I would encourage us to think about is we do have a tree commission. We could establish a sidewalk commission where individuals would be appointed from each ward, and they would basically be able to really focus on this issue. They would know their communities and could have come to agreement on what, use the inputs of it and of the sidewalk survey that's been done, and come to agreements on what the prioritization should be, and would be able to deal with questions or requests that a particular sidewalk be installed in a particular place ahead of something else and assess. And I think that would depoliticize it for us, and these individuals would be appointed. So I think we might want to consider that possibility. If we're not going to do that, I'm not ready to vote to say that we're really going to live or die by this ranking. I guess the other option would be that we, as council members, figure out a way to prioritize, which just seems like it's going to be really messy. I had two questions. One is the money that we're talking about here can only be used for new sidewalks? We can't use this to pay for repairs of sidewalks? Is that correct?
And much of what's in here relates to repair.
Repair of sidewalks, okay. Then the question I had, I asked this of the consultants also, do we have a number for like when we install, for every linear foot or 10 feet or 100 feet of sidewalk that we install, is there some like maintenance number that annual maintenance number that we would have? Because every time we build a sidewalk, it's not just okay, we pay to put it in. It's we're going to have to then replace that sidewalk at some point or repair that sidewalk. So I'm curious if we have.
Historically, we have not had an active maintenance program on sidewalks. We've addressed sidewalks either when we're doing street renovation projects in total, or we address it with complaints related to trip hazards. And those are fairly infrequent. If a large section of sidewalk, I'm talking a block or a half block, is severely affected, previously the only method we've used to address it is when we're resurfacing the street. So we haven't had an active maintenance program. The only caveat in some of the information we've provided is in the event that we go to a more permeable surface in some areas, and I will say that it's not going to be appropriate in some areas, but in those areas where it's determined to be feasible, there is a required at least annual maintenance, if not more. So there's some significant changes to the way we provide maintenance on sidewalks if we go that route than we currently do now.
So I understand that we don't have like a structured maintenance program, but de facto we have a cost. There is a cost out there for every linear square foot of sidewalk you install. Whether we might defer the cost and not pay it and have broken sidewalks, just like when you pave a street, right? For some number of miles, for each mile of street, there's some number that you'd use in budgeting that you should be spending on average for each mile of street. And all I'm asking is that we have that number for sidewalks, because every foot we install means that there's some ongoing commitment that we're committing to in terms of costs.
So some assignment of some value, for example, 5% of the cost of installing new sidewalks would be needed to deal with ongoing maintenance.
Yeah, whatever
it is.
It's probably like the useful life of the sidewalk, the cost of the sidewalk divided by the useful years of the sidewalk. It's some number that would be.
We'll need to look into that to see if there's some standard out there. Obviously, we don't have the history here.
Yeah, that's why I asked the consultants, and they said they thought it was out there. So if we could check back with them.
Councilmember Robinson.
I remember the presentation by the consultants. I don't remember the next conversation we had. Maybe I was out of town that time. Or maybe I blocked it from my memory.
Maybe there wasn't.
I don't think there was one.
There wasn't one.
Okay.
So, gee.
Oh, good. Well, then I didn't miss a thing. I'm still wondering how we're going to afford $41 million for sidewalks. So I just sort of throw that out there. And maybe that's over a long period of time.
Over a very long period of time.
But it's a scary number for me. Just to put that out there. And I'm also a little
And
scared.
there's probably some number when you install $41 million worth of sidewalks that you have to pay every year to maintain $41 million.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. What is it? What is the true cost, true and real cost of $41 million worth of sidewalks? And I looked at, as Councilmember Clay noted, the F ADA sidewalk compliance score has 17 points for a high ADA study. Well, that overshadows all the other points. I mean, one high ADA is huge.
I do think that as we all look at this, we have to really separate, they're really two very different kinds of categories. ADA compliance is a federal rule, and it's the right thing to do. And so that kind of functions, and it can be paid out of different kinds of funds. And so I do think we think of it, and we can think of it as something separate. Where it's also useful, and this is part of the give and take, which is very awkward for us all about trying to figure out priorities, I'm sure, is that if we've got several ADA improvements to make on a stretch, and then we've got a Tier 2 sidewalk connecting them, maybe it makes sense that we do it all at the same time, even though it's not the highest priority sidewalk. But it kind of makes sense because we're all in the area and we're fixing this up, and you can get from the store to the corner better. So I mean, that's the squishy part of this. But I do think we do have to think of them in some senses as kind of as separate bodies, as separate functions.
Okay.
And that's why they have such different kinds of rankings.
Okay, and then there was the Safe Routes to School component of it, too. Am I right on that one? And that was a priority in part because there was funding available for that kind of sidewalk or that use. Am I right there? Okay.
The missing sidewalk study was funded with Safe Routes to School funds.
Okay, the missing sidewalk study. What I'm not seeing in here is something that did come up tonight when on the Prince George's Avenue request was made, and I think it was an important issue, and that is that I'm not seeing in here issues of traffic or cut-through or safety. In other words, which streets have a lot of traffic on them. I went to high school in a city that didn't have any sidewalks at all. There wasn't a lot of cut-through traffic, but people kind of liked not having sidewalks. It was a funny town where you had to go to the main post office to get your mail. They didn't even have mail delivered to your home. But so I continue to be afraid of the $41 million. I'm wondering if the prioritization isn't missing kind of dangerous streets where you have sidewalks. And I'm afraid of this kind of a tail wagging dog thing of the ADA where, oh my God, we've got to spend $20 million on ramps, and it would only cost $20 million for all new sidewalks or something like that. And so I've got some levels of discomfort, and it doesn't have to do with what needs to be done in my ward, or even the conversations about what needs to be done in my ward. It's just kind of, do we really need sidewalks? Part of my thinking also is, along with what Josh said, what's the long-term cost of sidewalks, and is it environmentally sensitive as well? It's more pervious surface. And I'm not, maybe I'm missing it, but how much more is an impervious surface than a pervious, or how much more is a pervious surface sidewalk than an impervious surface sidewalk?
It's in the data we've evaluated runoff as well as costs and permeability between the different types of sidewalks.
Okay.
It's attached in your document.
Okay. I must have missed it. Can you summarize it for me or point me towards it so that I can see?
Sure. In the package item, option for new sidewalks, cost construction, and competition. If you switch to the second or third page.
I see. Okay, standard sidewalk, $3, brick or concrete, $12.
That's the cost comparison. The next page compares the permeability of the variety of different sidewalk.
All right, standard 90, lawn 13.
90 gallons per hour, down to a lawn of 13 gallons per hour, roughly for a certain type of storm. In addition to that, below, I think to try to capture this, at least for us on a staff level, we took a look at what our current impervious coverage is within the city of Tacoma Park.
Right.
So we have
7 million of roof surface and 6 million of road surface.
right, and it doesn't include driveways, it doesn't include parking lots, it doesn't include lead walks into people's houses. So obviously the imperviousness in the city is higher than that. And if we were to add a sidewalk so that every street in the city had a sidewalk on both sides, which is not something that we're advocating, it's just maximizing as much surface as you possibly could. And if you use traditional sidewalk, you would increase imperviousness in the city by 0.05%. So it's a fairly small relative figure, which for me as a manager is important because there may be better ways to spend those additional monies capturing runoff from a point source like a large parking lot versus spreading it out through permeability and minor sidewalk installations. I'm not speaking strongly one way or the other. It's just, I think, an important piece of information to weigh in.
And if I can just add on that point, that as I was thinking about that, I also was thinking about what I see as one typical way that sidewalks are installed is that you have pervious surface on at least one side of it. And depending on how it's sloped, it can just be a matter of the rain, the water, whatever it is, hitting the sidewalk and then going right to a pervious surface. Therefore, even though you've added some sidewalk, you haven't really added to the runoff.
It can be captured in the green strip, and there's some areas where we have the ability.
Yard, whatever it might be.
Okay, well, those are my comments.
One thing I guess I'd just like to add, as we talk about the relative costs, I think that one thing that I don't know how to calculate is the economic benefit of having more easily walkable paths, especially for seniors who could stay in their homes longer and that kind of thing. So don't know how to calculate that. I do know that in some communities that ends up being, there is a commitment to ensuring that the community is more livable because people can stay in their homes for a longer period of times because they can walk to their stores and that kind of thing. So that's one of the benefits. I don't know how to calculate that.
If I can just make one observation about kind of where the conversation goes from here. It's 10 of 11, and my feeling is no matter what we or others might think of our decisions, I think they get worse after 11 o'clock. And so I would suggest that we don't want to go real long on this. And I would wonder if we have suggestions for how to go about, if that's what we want to do, adapting rather than adopting the ranking system. We're obviously not going to figure that out tonight. I think the proposed contract for the support services, correct me if I'm wrong, would kind of flow from a decision on that. We wouldn't just contract and not have anything for them to contract for, or could we do that independent of any other decision?
You could do that independent, because really all you're doing is contracting for the services. Obviously, if there's going to be a long lag time between when we would actually have them performing work, that could create some issues regarding pricing, but there would be nothing to stop you from going ahead and contracting.
It's on the point of where to go.
Okay. And in terms of the alternate materials for sidewalks, that we haven't really, except for that last little bit, we haven't really discussed that. And so would that be helpful to have, even if we don't have the first decision, to have the alternative materials for sidewalks, or is that something that waits on more implementation?
I can see that waiting. Our primary goal was a staff education component as well as general education component, so we all know a lot more about sidewalk composition than we did before, and I think, it can inform our decisions in the future.
The only thing I would add, if the council were inclined to proceed with a more permeable type of sidewalk, that may influence who we would recommend as a vendor in terms of construction services and engineering. We would want a firm that would be familiar with that particular type of construction, and I don't know that all engineering firms are.
Okay. So it sounds from that a possible first outcome from this evening might be a little bit of discussion about alternative materials for sidewalks, because that might inform the, who we would go out for. But would that only be for design, for the engineering and construction support, or would that be for the implementation once we get to that? Both? Okay.
Construction oversight function, I think is what you're saying, versus, and as well as a design.
Okay, so that it would, a helpful input on alternative materials would be needed for any other step.
Well, for curb ramps, is that something that we would want to move more quickly on, and therefore, that's the one area where, I think.
My understanding from the city engineer is that improvements to existing curb ramps could be handled with our existing contract and with our existing staff. There isn't viewed to be the need to design those in the same way that.
But would we need a permeable discussion before then?
My guess is they're of such a limited nature that they wouldn't really be an ideal candidate for a permeable surface.
Okay, so it sounds like in terms of going forward, what would be most helpful would be input on the alternative materials, which might inform then going out for contracting for engineering and construction support services, and input on whether people agree that it's a good idea to prioritize the fixing of the ramps as a first step. And the longer-term discussion would be how we adapt the ranking system. So, anything else we need to, I just want to give people parameters for comments that would be helpful in what will necessarily be a limited time on this. Anything else?
No, I think what Sarah was alluding to, and I have on my to-do list tomorrow to call Jim Peck at MML, who I've had some discussions with in the past, is this issue of the funding that we carried over from last year. I think there's subsequently been an Attorney General's opinion about how that would be treated, but I just want to make sure we don't find ourselves in a situation of rolling too many funds forward in a period of declining general fund revenues. We may find ourselves hitting a state cap and having to return funds. So I just need to do some calculations.
We don't want to end up like the adjacent county having to return funds.
We may not be in that position. I just need to run some updated calculations and talk to Jim Peck and just find out what the latest requirements are.
Councilmember Clay and then Councilmember Skipper.
My first comment is about the permeable surface. I think the point is not so much that we have to use permeable or non-permeable surfaces. The point is that we want to have the lowest environmental impact sidewalks that we can have, and there may be other ways to do that besides permeable surface sidewalks. From what people tell me, the sidewalk installation method that occurred on Ethan Allen between the junction and Elm would not be an example because it runs the sidewalk right to the curb, and thus everything pours onto the sidewalk and then straight into the street, and there's no buffer beforehand. So I would just say that I think permeable surfaces are great, but if there are mitigating factors why that's impossible, the real objective is low impact on stormwater. The other thing I want to say is I'm really concerned about the process and kind of shoving forward for the sake of shoving forward or finishing at 11. I'm happy to stay till 1 o'clock in the morning to finish this. That's what it takes. So here's my concern.
Trying to focus.
I know you are. I think that this is a political process, and I don't think that we're going to make it a non-political process by moving forward with the current the matrix with the current point system. I think that's going to cause hostility with our constituents. It's going to make people unhappy. I don't think it reflects what the knowledge of the community is around what the priorities are and what the issues are. I don't think that means that we have to sit here and eke out every small section of sidewalk over a series of meetings. I think we could use some combination of things that looks at some objective criteria, and I think looks at how they're weighted. Somebody made a decision about how these things were weighted, and there's no reason why it couldn't be us. There's no reason why, if we found somebody who was independently objective around these things, that it couldn't be them also. But in addition to that, I feel very strongly that we have to have another mechanism, that we have to have policy priorities. So, for example, I would put out a policy priority that we build new sidewalks before we go back and replace old sidewalks. And I would find that to be a policy priority from my ward's perspective, because our perspective is that we've been paying for sidewalks and sidewalk maintenance in all the other wards for years and years and years. And I think that when Doug was here, he certainly talked about that relative to Ward 6, and I don't know how some of the other wards do, but so I would like to see new sidewalks installed. And another criteria that I think that we should have is maybe as the initial criteria or policy, and then come back behind that within that policy what we do with this matrix, is that I think we need a network of sidewalks. And I don't think that those are always necessarily tied to what we would consider the safe routes to schools sidewalks. Just for the sake of demonstration projects, there are just demonstrating. I'm not saying that I want to argue for these because I haven't vetted this with my community or not. But you know, if I had to look objectively at Ward 2, I would say Lincoln Avenue is a major thoroughfare that connects to Carroll Avenue, which has sidewalks and is in our. I would think about it in terms of essentially arterials and feeders, and I would install sidewalks on at least one side of the arterials first, so that I only have to send my kid. I happen to live at the corner of Lincoln and Hayward, but somebody who lived at Hayward would only have to send their kid a block to get to a sidewalk where they could follow the sidewalk all the way to school across crosswalks. And you know, as a policy, that's what I would look at. Elm Avenue, also a street that runs from Ward 2 all the way through Ward 3, is an example, and I'm sure everybody could come up with examples from their own wards that would be these kind of arterial streets, and they would follow what either our arterial roads are in effect being used as arterial roads. You know, Flower Avenue has sidewalks already, but it's an example of one that, you know, is effectively an arterial road, and Elm and Lincoln the same. And so I just feel like we could marry our own localized knowledge and put localized knowledge to work. I mean, that's what we talk about in Tacoma Park. It's why we say we have volunteers. It's why everybody engages in this process. It's why today we had the Ward 3 meeting, so that we can leverage and utilize the localized knowledge. And we could come up with a system that looked at that as our starting point, and then within that looked at this matrix system.
Can I just follow up, Colleen, because I'm looking at yours. Lincoln has got several Tier 1 sections.
Yes, Lincoln did fine.
And I haven't looked at Elm yet. Well, Elm has several.
Elm did fine as well.
So I'm trying to figure out what is missing in the ranking. Those two streets worked.
Yes.
They are these 6 different criteria.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, is there anything obvious that's not weighted in the ranking that needs to be, that may address those areas that didn't pop up?
The Prince George's woman who came tonight, I would argue that she's a perfect example of somebody, a group that has taken local knowledge about what is essentially it's being.
Yeah, but Prince George's is really high up.
I think hers is a Tier 2.
But if you look at this, I think there's 11 segments along Prince George's Avenue, and some are
There's
Tier
1 and Tier 2.
There's a mixture. There's also some ADA things. You know,
But all the construct sidewalks, her areas.
it makes
Tier
perfect
1.
sense to do Prince George's Avenue in looking at the data that's in the table.
But she comes up in Tier 2. And I think at one point she's been told Tier 3.
It may just be on her segment. But
that's the only segment that's it's a sidewalk gap. It's the only one that's missing it.
And we have construct sidewalk in several areas of Prince George's. It's a little hard to read, but there's 2 Tier 1 construct sidewalks. There's 4 Tier 2 construct sidewalks. The rest is ADA on Prince George's.
So in situations like that, it makes sense to fill in the gaps. If you've got...
Tier
if
1
you-
with a Tier 2 in between, you would do the whole section.
Because that way you don't
Okay.
have to keep hauling the contractor out to the same site over a period of time, and it
Sure.
ends up being less
So
expensive.
far, it seems as if the criteria has worked to identify, has worked, gelled well with the
and
knowledge.
Central and Garland are on mine as well, but I don't think that's been true for everybody. And I'm not arguing for my own personal ward also. I think it's part process. But, I don't think that that's what's been messaged, is that we would, we would run down the same street.
Well, it is similar to what we did with the street study. We, in some cases, they were block by block, and in some cases, we made decisions to delay a higher rated block to a later time and move others. It just, you have to use a little common sense. You have to try to make connections. I'm still trying to figure out if there isn't anything in the criteria that's missing that would address, give a comfort level to using the ranking to
I think
evaluate the program.
I think the difficulty is, it's a useful thing, but it's also the difficulty is that, it's ranking these segment by segments. And so if somebody looks at their block, it may not, ring all the bells, but we do have to look at it in a more coherent way. And that's part of the reason why we also have the information in a map form, because then you can kind of see it. You say, oh, there is a connection there, even if it's not all the same block. It might go around the corner, and it might make sense to get to Carroll or whatever that is. And so it's it's not clean. It's just not, in a rank order. But so far, when we've kind of spotted it, it seemed to make sense.
How many years does the Tier 1 group represent?
We have a dollar figure for the Tier 1.
How much do we spend it?
Tier 1, $6.15 million, 183 segments, 63,000 linear feet.
How much does that represent, given just ballpark estimates? Is it a 5-year span, a 10-year span?
If we're just looking at sidewalks in isolation, we carried over about, well, I brought it with me, $369,000 from last year.
So $1 million would be 3 years. So $6 million would be 18 years.
Possibly.
So within that, I think we'd have to decide what we did first, and I think that we should have a mechanism to do that, and I think it should be, it might be cost, do the cheapest within those first, but I would think we should make that decision.
Well, and that is part also of the matrix. I think a lot of things that people think, there might be an area where people think there should be a sidewalk, but there's a slope, there's a tree, there's whatever. It ranks up the cost, and so that's why they kind of drop down in the rankings, because we do give a higher priority in the way that this is calculated to those projects that are cheaper to do.
One of the factors that we took into consideration in working with the consultant on this is what's doable, what can we afford to do, what's needed. Not necessarily in that order, but those were all factors that were taken into consideration.
Instead of chewing up the funds really quickly because you do the ones that are the highest ranked and they have the highest, for some reason, the highest costs, and you've used it all up and people go, I can't tell where you've done any sidewalks.
The sidewalk that people have talked about in the past in Ward 1 on Piney Branch Road, for example, because of the slope of the road there, that could eat up an enormous amount of the funds for a very small segment of road because of the slope and the lack of public right-of-way. So an effort was made to include that or to factor that in evaluating or weighting the various segments that were identified in the study.
The other thing, too, to keep in mind is, as Darrell said, we often do sidewalks as part of street project. So if there's street reconstruction, or the state's doing street reconstruction, or there's, that's the time also to, especially to have somebody else pay for half of this list when that's possible.
Given the hour.
You don't want to stay till 1?
I don't want to stay till 1 if I can help it.
People have been
So here's where I am on this. I'm not very much in favor of the alternative construction techniques, materials, for a reason that actually isn't in here, which occurred to me while I was shoveling the snow the other day. You're welcome. It's much easier on nice flat concrete. All of these pervious surfaces will be extremely difficult to clear the snow on, unless you're really quick and you get out there with a broom and broom the snow, sweep the snow off before it actually starts sticking. Once it sticks, man, then we're going to end up using a lot of salt, which has other environmental things. So I actually am not in favor of using the alternative construction techniques and materials in general. The second thing is I am in favor of delaying this contract, the proposed contract for engineering construction services, unless we're going to lose the money, of course. Don't want to lose the money. And instead would opt for going ahead with ADA ramps, because I think we need to demonstrate some kind of good faith effort on ADA stuff, and those ramps really do make a big difference. There's a handful of places where we don't have ramps, and we have folks who really need the ramps. So that's where I am on this.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I would think that this list was as good as we could get if there weren't that property on Geneva Avenue and the problems with Geneva Avenue. I think it's a good illustration of why just taking this at face value doesn't work. It comes out ranked too low. I think it's, when you compare it to other streets, it's clear that there is at least some discrepancy in the process. I really liked the way that the road survey came out. There were areas where residents didn't like it because it didn't push their street up, but it was done very objectively, with the type of base, the thickness of the material, the cracks in the surface. There was a lot of objective criteria that was measured. The problem with the sidewalk survey is it's a little bit more subjective, and there were at least some criteria that weren't used that should be. And again, I go back. I think it's a great first crack. We just haven't gotten there yet, and I'm not willing to sign on to say, yes, this is the thing we should use to guide us for the next 20 years until we refine the list and don't find those, in this case, it's not potholes in the list, but those cracks in our sidewalk. We need something that that's a little bit better. And again, I think we've taken a giant step towards being where we want to be, but I'm not willing to say that we're there yet.
So, if I just might ask for clarification, in terms of the limited objectivity of the review criteria, essentially you're talking about the connectivity score. In terms of identifying pedestrian generators?
In case of Geneva Avenue, there were institutions that have heavy use of that, heavy need for sidewalks that were not included in that criteria.
And one of the things that this system is would allow us to do is to go through, and if there are street segments where they look for some odd reason, as though they haven't been appropriately ranked. And that would frankly be the area where there may be some pieces missing as far as connectivity. The rest of it is fairly objective. Either the slope is it's either like this or like that.
But again, I think where we identify institutions that have high use, again, I think there's just some tweaking needs to be done to the list that they provided and the formula that they use, but I don't think we're there yet. I think we need to tweak it before, and then you bring it back and we say, okay, that looks good now.
And if I just may say, that's what I was trying to address at the beginning with those types of tweaks. So
but
people were thinking I was going for something else.
Right.
That's what I was talking about. Councilmember Wright.
So given the lateness of the hour, I would put out a proposal for moving forward. The first is that we prioritize the ADA ramps because we know that's a high priority and we want to do that. The second is that we agree that this list is generally directionally correct, but that every council member needs to review the list and point out those errors where, for some reason, the criteria hasn't properly captured what we would know commonsensically, if that's a word, where things should be a priority, and we should agree on a date. I don't know if it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month from now, by which we would all give that information back to city staff so then they could give us a new list which says this is what the priority is. And lastly, I would agree with Councilmember Clay that we should prioritize building new sidewalks generally over repairing old ones, except where the situation is that existing sidewalks are truly hazardous or an ADA problem. My ward does have a lot of sidewalks. Yes, money has been spent over the years on that. I totally am sympathetic to that. But I also think it's, politically bad for me if we have a really bad sidewalk that's like an ADA problem and we're saying we're going to build something new before we take care of the, what we already have. It's kind of that thing of like, okay, let's put an addition on the house, but we have a hole in the roof over here. So with that one caveat, I'm generally supportive of the idea of prioritizing new over existing. So,
and if I can just add one point to that, I do want to let people know what previous councils have thought about kind of who traditionally had sidewalks and who didn't, and paying for them. When there wasn't money to do sidewalks, but people wanted to do sidewalks, there were arguments about whether they should be paid for from tax funds or with special assessments. And the argument that I recall being made most forcefully by Councilmember Elrich was that the people who have had sidewalks have basically paid for those because when they bought their houses, those houses have more value because of that sidewalk and the connectivity and the attributes that go into a neighborhood that has sidewalks. Therefore, those are priced higher, and therefore they pay higher taxes, and therefore they paid for them. And the end result of that thought process was that new sidewalks should go in by special assessments because people who didn't have them haven't paid for them to begin with, like the other people who did have them have paid for them. You may agree with the argument, you may not, but that was the argument that won the day in previous councils in talking about were we ever going to come up with a way to pay for sidewalks? No, it was going to have to be by special assessment. Well, now we have a mechanism, limited though it may be, to pay for them, but that's why we didn't go there before.
That's an argument of convenience.
Yeah.
And I would press Mr. Elrich to find another example where he would argue that people who pay more taxes deserve more services.
I'm just telling you, that was the argument at that point.
And I'm sure he argued it forcefully.
Yes, very forcefully.
you could also argue that it was the wealthier communities that had the political influence and got the sidewalks in. And yes, they might have bigger houses and pay a bigger assessment, but we're not in the world, I think, in Tacoma Park where we're trying to say, like, oh, because you pay higher taxes, you should get more services, or that money should be spent right in front of your house. We're in a community together, and some people pay higher taxes and have more money, and it's a communal. There's things like sidewalks are communal, and everyone should pay for them.
Bruce, you made me so mad I broke my fingernail. It's bleeding out. I'm wounded. I'm wounded.
The sense I'm getting is that the ADA improvements are, that the group as a whole is generally in support of at least starting the process that we need to take on this side of the table to get some of that going so that we can kind of at least start that process.
My sense was that the proposal that Councilmember Wright outlined would probably have broad general support among the rest of us. I may be wrong, but
It'd be nice to know.
Yeah.
I always love an opportunity to support Councilmember Ray.
Yes.
If we do a little straw poll,
Yes, we
you know,
can.
like send a little implement up in the air and say that you generally agree with the proposal by Councilmember Wright. I see 5.
With that in mind, particularly focusing on the section about going through and looking at the street segments that are in your particular ward, how much time might one need to do that?
February 1?
February 1st?
Is that?
February
That's 2 weeks away.
Propose another date, March
Too
1.
soon?
March 1.
I'm trying to do one that's easy to remember.
Would, if we talk to the mayor and he put it on the agenda in 3 weeks, would that be appropriate?
What's the appropriate, what do we?
I like March 1 because it gives me a little more time to check in, like publish.
The other thing that we can do,
What I would like to do is I will try to check by next week whether there are any issues about funding that you need to be concerned about. I think since there seems to be a consensus about moving forward with the ADA ramps, that's about $450,000 right there. That would probably be a sufficient enough expenditure to knock out any potential problem, but I would just like to verify that.
the other thing we can do to facilitate that is get you a copy of the map that has the pretty little lines that are in different colors so you can kind of see. Do you have it in there? I don't have it in my pack.
So what's our task for whatever this date is?
To look at the rankings and see,
What the anomalies
Councilmember
are.
Siemens as an example, if there is a street in your ward that for whatever reason you would rate highly that did not end up in Tier 1.
And I think in
We would
particular,
like
as
surrounded by
Councilmember
Tier 1.
Stevens talked about, this is one where it should have perhaps been ranked higher because of the institutions in the area in terms of connectiveness. That's a very useful thing. That can simply be, a correction.
And I think it ranked low because there's some right-of-way issues.
We drive all the streets in our ward with our chart and reanalyze every street.
You have to walk.
Walk.
Good walk. Actually, your wheelchair is more appropriate.
I take a wheelchair on every sidewalk or lack therereof and
You repurpose one of the 4th of July floats.
Okay, got it. All right.
We are past 11 o'clock.
Yeah, we are.
And at the other thing that we can do at the staff level is we've identified a couple of vendors that seem to be good fits on the surface. We can make some additional inquiries to see what their experience is in terms of dealing with alternative designs to address runoff, be it in the green space or the yard, or if they have any experience with impervious surfaces. Surfaces, yes. Whatever, I get it. I'm tired, I'm sorry. Anyway, so we'll continue to investigate that so that once a decision is made with that, we can sort of facilitate that process too. Does that make sense?